Hey there, tonight we're exploring the fascinating traditions of New Year in early America, where bells rang not just for celebration, but to ward off spirits. Because the truth is, these festivities were as much about fear as they were about fun. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the murky glow of early America, New Year's Eve was less about glittery ball drops and more about roaring bonfires and clanging bells. Picture a time when noise complaints were less about a neighbor's bass-heavy party mix and more about someone's idea of warding off evil spirits, or perhaps just scaring off that lurking bear. The early settlers were a quirky bunch, blending practical needs with a sprinkle of superstition, and their New Year celebrations were no exception. Now, let's talk about the mashup of cultures that laid the groundwork for these festivities. The early settlers brought a suitcase full of European traditions, which was about as diverse as a potluck with too many potato salads. Think German, Dutch, English, and Scottish customs all vying for attention like overzealous relatives at a family reunion. Meanwhile, Native American tribes had their own rich traditions, which were often more in tune with the rhythm of nature than the clang of a church bell. This cultural cocktail created a New Year celebration that was as unpredictable as a colonial weather forecast. Take, for instance, the settlers' affection for bonfires. These weren't just any fires. They were like the rock concerts of colonial times. Imagine stacks of wood piled high, flames licking the sky, and the whole community gathered around. It was part practical, because hey, it's cold in January, and part ceremonial. Bonfires were believed to cleanse the community of the previous year's misfortunes. If you ever wondered why your New Year's resolutions feel a bit like setting fire to your past, thank these early revelers. They had the literal version down to a science. Bells were another favorite, and not just because they were the colonial equivalent of Spotify. The clanging of bells was a cacophonous tradition with roots deep in European lore, supposedly scaring away dark forces and ensuring a prosperous new year. In reality, it was probably more effective at terrifying the local wildlife and ensuring that every creature within a 5-mile radius knew that the settlers were committed to their noise-making craft. But who could blame them? In a land where the unknown lurked behind every tree, a little extra noise might have felt like a comforting shield. The settlers weren't just playing with fire and sound for kicks, though. These customs had deeper cultural significance, reflecting the hope and anxiety of a people carving out a new life in a land that was both opportunity and enigma. As the clock ticked toward midnight, these celebrations were a chance to reset, a moment to reflect on survival and to wish for more prosperous times ahead. After all, when you've spent the past year dodging everything from harsh winters to crop failures, a little optimism goes a long way. A unique twist in these celebrations came from the fusion with Native American customs. Native tribes had their own ways of marking time and celebrating the cycles of the earth. The Iroquois, for instance, celebrated midwinter with a series of ceremonies that included storytelling and feasting, acknowledging the passage of seasons and the continuity of life, a theme that resonated deeply with settlers who were learning, often the hard way, to live off the land. Practical realities of life in early America meant that celebrations were often as much about survival as they were about festivity. Food was not just a centerpiece, but a currency of celebration, a tangible sign of abundance. If you were lucky enough to have a fattened turkey or a generous helping of root vegetables, it was a display of your prosperity and hard work. In a time when a bad harvest could spell disaster, these celebratory meals were a much-needed morale booster. But let's not romanticize too much. For every joyous bell and warming bonfire, there were harsh realities. Supplies were often scarce, winters were brutally cold, and disease was a constant threat. The cheer of New Year could quickly be overshadowed by the grim challenges of day-to-day life. Yet it was precisely this backdrop of hardship that made the celebrations all the more significant. They weren't just about welcoming a new year. They were about survival, resilience, and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, the next year would be a little kinder. In essence, Early New Year celebrations in America were a patchwork of borrowed traditions and local adaptations, a testament to the settlers' ingenuity and determination. As they rang in the new year with bells and bonfires, they were doing more than just making noise. They were forging a new cultural identity, one that would echo down the centuries to come. And in a world where every day was a balancing act between belief and practicality, who could resist a little extra hope, even if it came wrapped in smoke and sound? The bonfires and bell ringing were just the beginning. As we dig into the economic underbelly of these early New Year shindigs, it becomes clear that they were less about spontaneous joy and more about the cold, hard cash, or lack thereof. In a time when the economic landscape was about as stable as a jello mold on a hot day, the settlers' celebrations were dictated by what they could afford, which often wasn't much. Let's talk about the star of any colonial party: rum. This wasn't just a drink. It was practically liquid gold. Imported from the Caribbean, rum was a staple at any self-respecting New Year's bash. But this wasn't your average tiki bar fare. Nope, the cost of rum was enough to make a grown settler weep into his pewter mug. By the mid-1700, a gallon of rum could set you back around 3 shillings, a hefty price considering that a skilled worker might earn about 30 shillings a month. That's a tenth of your salary down the hatch, and that's if you're lucky enough to have steady work. So, for most folks, rum was reserved for special occasions, like not dying in the past year. Then there were the spices. Oh, spices. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. These were the bling of colonial cooking. Imported from the far-flung ports of the Dutch East India Company, they were as valuable as gold dust. A pound of nutmeg, for instance, might cost a staggering 85 shillings in the 17th century. To put that into perspective, that's nearly 3 months' wages for a skilled laborer. With prices like that, it's no wonder that pinch of spice in your New Year's pudding was considered the ultimate flex. Of course, not everyone was sipping rum and nibbling on spiced delicacies. Enter the Puritans, the original party poopers. These folks weren't known for their festive spirit, and New Year celebrations were no exception. The Puritans viewed such revelry with a suspicious eye, convinced that the devil lurked behind every jovial jig and hearty toast. They were all about the work hard, pray harder lifestyle, with little room for the frivolities of New Year's Eve. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite their stoic exterior, the Puritans weren't entirely immune to the pressures of community expectations. After all, nobody wants to be the only one not invited to the neighborhood bonfire. So, they struck a peculiar balance. While public celebrations might have been frowned upon, private gatherings were a different story. Behind closed doors, even the most pious Puritan might indulge in a modest celebration. A little cider here, a slice of pie there. It was a delicate dance between maintaining religious integrity and joining in the communal spirit. This reluctance to embrace New Year festivities wasn't just about religious dogma. It was also about practicality. The Puritans were all about the bottom line, and they knew that every shilling spent on rum or spices was a shilling not spent on essential supplies like grain or livestock. In a world where financial security was as elusive as a warm January breeze, they couldn't afford to squander resources on fleeting pleasures. So, the Puritans adapted. They found joy in simplicity, opting for homemade treats and home-brewed beverages. Their celebrations were less about excess and more about gratitude, a nod to the year's harvest rather than a toast to bacchanalian indulgence. It was a reflection of their values, a quiet acknowledgement that every day of survival was a victory in itself. But let's not paint the Puritans as joyless ascetics. They understood the importance of community and the role of celebrations in strengthening social bonds. They just preferred their revelry to be a little less raucous, a little more reflective. After all, in a society where survival hinged on cooperation, maintaining good relations with your neighbors was as crucial as planting your crops on time. In the grand tapestry of early American New Year celebrations, the Puritans' restraint added a unique thread. They were the counterpoint to the more boisterous traditions of their fellow settlers, a reminder that even in the midst of hardship, there was room for introspection and gratitude. And while they might have eschewed the more extravagant aspects of the holiday, their influence was felt in the way the celebrations evolved, a blend of jubilation and reflection, excess and moderation. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the settlers might have been raising their mugs and clanging their bells, but they were also laying the groundwork for a uniquely American tradition. It was a tradition born of necessity and tempered by belief, a testament to the resilience of a people determined to carve out a new life in a world as unpredictable as a New England winter. And in this dance of economy, belief, and community, they found a way to welcome the new year on their own terms. 1 shilling, 1 bell, 1 bonfire at a time. And there you have it, a bunch of settlers ringing in the new year with more bells than a cat convention. But before you picture these folks as just a merry band of bell-ringing, rum-sipping revelers, let's dish out some context about the social dynamics and political undercurrents of these gatherings. Because, my friends, where there's a crowd, there's always a little political maneuvering and social posturing, even if you're standing around a bonfire in a wool coat that's seen better days. First up, let's talk about those community bonfires. Sure, they were great for warding off the cold and maybe scaring away a few ghosts, but they were also the colonial version of a status update. Who you were seen with, and who you weren't, could speak volumes. It was an unspoken social currency, and just like today, everybody wanted to be in the right circles. Not that different from trying to get into the cool group chat, right? Now, in a community where most folks were holding on to their shillings with a grip tighter than a lobster claw, these gatherings were about more than just warmth and cheer. They were a chance to rub elbows with the local bigwigs, the ones who had a say in how things got done. And if you played your cards right, maybe you could curry a little favor or even secure a loan. After all, financial security in early America was as fickle as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. And let's not forget the role of taverns in all this. These were the de facto town halls, the heart of colonial gossip and decision-making. Picture a dimly lit room filled with patrons nursing mugs of ale, their conversations, a heady mix of farming woes and political debates. It was here that resolutions were made, both personal and political. Think of it as New Year's resolutions with a side of ale and a sprinkle of intrigue. But before you imagine these resolutions as noble declarations of self-improvement, let's get real. Many were more about survival than self-betterment. A promise to plant crops earlier in the season or to barter more effectively could mean the difference between thriving and just getting by. And then there were the political resolutions, the ones that could sway local elections or influence community decisions. You see, early America was a place where politics was as local as it gets, and a well-timed resolution could ripple through the community like gossip at a quilting bee. Taverns were also where alliances were forged and rivalries simmered. That guy who kept outbidding you for lumber at the market. The new year was as good a time as any to hash things out over a drink or to make a public spectacle of your disdain. And let's not pretend it was all about the men. Women, though often sidelined in official roles, wielded their own brand of influence. They managed households with the precision of a general leading an army, and their opinions often swayed their husbands' political and social allegiances. Never underestimate the power of a well-placed word from a savvy spouse. As for the private parties, these were the real hotspots for social posturing. Hosts would go all out to impress, laying out spreads that showcased their wealth, or at least gave a good illusion of it. It was less about genuine hospitality and more about keeping up appearances. A fine sugar cake or a well-spiced nog was a statement as bold as any modern-day Instagram post. And if you were lucky enough to snag an invite, declining was not an option. It was a delicate dance of social obligations, and no one wanted to be the wallflower at the year's most talked-about event. But beneath the surface of these parties and public gatherings lurked the realities of political maneuvering. In a society where your neighbor might also be your fiercest political rival, social events were as strategic as a chess match. The right word in the right ear could pave the way for political alliances, while a misplaced comment could sow the seeds of future discord. It was a precarious balance, and everyone played the game, whether they admitted it or not. Yet for all the political machinations and social jockeying, these gatherings also served a crucial purpose. They reinforced community bonds, reminded folks of their shared humanity, and provided a brief respite from the harsh realities of colonial life. In a world where survival often depended on the goodwill of your neighbors, maintaining those relationships was as vital as securing a good crop yield. So next time you find yourself at a New Year's party, take a moment to appreciate the long history behind the celebrations, from community bonfires that doubled as status checks to taverns that buzzed with political chatter. These early gatherings were about more than just ringing in a new year. They were a reflection of the complex social and political landscape of early America, a stage where the drama of human ambition and survival played out under a sky lit by bonfires and echoed by the clang of bells. And as the settlers clinked their mugs and shared their hopes for the coming year, they were participating in a tradition that was as much about community and resilience as it was about revelry. Speaking of traditions, let's address some of the more colorful tales that have woven themselves into the tapestry of early American New Year celebrations. Because, spoiler alert, the reality was often as different from the legend as a firecracker is from a bonfire. When it comes to New Year's Eve myths, it seems like everyone wanted to be the hero of their own colonial epic, even if that meant embellishing the truth a tad. First up, the legendary brawls that supposedly erupted at these gatherings. Picture this: rowdy settlers, fueled by rum and rivalry, turning every bonfire into a spontaneous wrestling match. Sounds exciting, right? Except reality was a bit more mundane. Sure, there were disagreements, because put enough people and alcohol in one place, and you're bound to get a few heated debates about sheep prices or the best way to thatch a roof. But full-blown brawls, not so much. In truth, most settlers were too preoccupied with making it through the winter to waste energy on fistfights. They might have exchanged some sharp words or a shove or two, but they were more likely to settle disputes over a pint at the tavern than risk a black eye in the snow. Then there's the notion that these festivities were wild, uninhibited parties, the colonial equivalent of a New Year's Eve in Times Square. The image of settlers dancing with abandon around giant bonfires, throwing caution to the wind. Well, that's more myth than fact. Sure, there was dancing, but it was often a controlled affair, more akin to a community barn dance than a rave. And speaking of dancing, those stories about settlers cutting loose like they were in a Broadway musical, highly exaggerated. For one, the practical constraints of heavy winter clothing did not make for easy twirling. Plus, most settlers were too busy trying to keep warm to risk turning their celebrations into an impromptu dance-off. A favorite myth is the supposed pyrotechnic displays. Imagine fireworks lighting up the night sky, a dazzling spectacle to ring in the new year. Sounds great, but the reality was more about avoiding frostbite than setting off fireworks. For starters, the technology of the time didn't support large-scale fireworks displays. What you might have seen were the occasional sparklers or firecrackers, but nothing that would rival modern celebrations. The truth is, any large flame would have been more about necessity, like keeping warm, than entertainment. And let's not forget the tales of settlers making grand resolutions, vowing to change their lives with the dawn of the new year. Sounds familiar, right? Except, back then, resolutions weren't about hitting the gym or breaking bad habits. They were more pragmatic, a promise to plant more corn, fix the barn roof, or finally trade that stubborn mule. In a world where survival was a daily challenge, resolutions were often a matter of life and death, not just personal growth. Now, let's debunk the supposed lavish feasts that were allegedly a staple of New Year celebrations. While it's true that food played a significant role, the idea of tables groaning under the weight of extravagant dishes is more fiction than fact. Imported delicacies like sugar and spices were luxuries few could afford. A typical feast was more likely to feature local produce and preserved meats, with maybe a special pie or pudding if the harvest had been kind. If you were expecting a medieval banquet, think again. These meals were about sustenance, not splendor, and for those who believe that these celebrations were an egalitarian affair, where everyone was welcome, let's take a closer look. Social divisions were as real as the cold bite of a January wind. While community events did bring people together, they also reinforced social hierarchies. Not everyone had a seat at the table or a place by the fire. The wealthy landowners might have thrown the biggest parties, but the smaller farmers and laborers often celebrated in more modest settings, if at all. The myth of universal inclusion is a comforting tale, but the truth is, social status mattered as much as ever. Now, let's talk about the popular belief that these celebrations were entirely about joy and merriment. The reality, surprise, surprise, was that they were just as much about survival and community cohesion. While the myth paints a picture of carefree revelry, the harsh truth was that these gatherings were a chance to strategize and plan for the year ahead. In a world where winter could wipe out entire communities, the focus was often on ensuring that everyone had enough to make it through to spring. So, there you have it. When it comes to early American New Year celebrations, the line between myth and reality is as wavy as the reflection of a bonfire in a pond. The settlers were practical folks, focused on survival and community. While they certainly knew how to celebrate, their priorities were often more down-to-earth than the legends suggest. But isn't that part of the charm? In a land where everyday life was an adventure, a little myth-making was perhaps their way of adding some sparkle to the grit. As we peel back the layers of romanticized narratives, we find a story of resilience and resourcefulness, qualities that defined these early Americans far more than any exaggerated tales of wild revelry. So next time you hear about colonial New Year's celebrations, remember, the truth is often more compelling than the myth. And in the case of our intrepid settlers, that's saying something. So as we close the chapter on the settlers' New Year celebrations, let's fast forward to the 19th century, a time when New Year's didn't just evolve, it practically got a complete makeover. Industrialization and urbanization were like the ultimate party crashers, shaking things up and turning tradition on its head. Imagine the scene. Cities swelling with factories, smokestacks like New Age bonfires, and bells traded for the hum of machinery. The shift from rural fields to bustling urban centers was as dramatic as ditching a horse-drawn carriage for a roaring steam train. But let's not jump ahead without setting the stage. By the 1800, America was transforming faster than you could say, manifest destiny. Railroads snaked across the landscape, connecting cities and shrinking the country like a wool sweater in a hot wash. With these iron arteries came a fresh influx of people, bringing with them diverse traditions and a thirst for new ways to celebrate. If early settlers' New Year's were about survival, the 19th century was more about reinvention. Think less bonfire, more ballroom. As cities grew, so did the scale of New Year festivities. What started as communal gatherings around a crackling fire morphed into grand public events. Picture New York City, already on its way to becoming the behemoth we know today, where New Year's Eve was a chance to showcase urban sophistication. By the mid-19th century, the city was hosting extravagant balls, complete with orchestras and enough champagne to float a battleship. The elite of society would gather in their finest attire, their resolutions more likely to involve social climbing than crop yields. And let's not forget the impact of technology. With the advent of gas lighting in the early 1800s, city streets could be lit up like a modern-day Times Square. This was a game-changer, transforming night into day and adding a literal glow to New Year celebrations. Suddenly, the idea of staying up until midnight didn't seem quite so daunting or perilous. It was a time to see and be seen, toasts clinking in the newly illuminated night. Now, you might be wondering, what about the less glamorous side of this urban evolution? Fear not, for where there is light, there is shadow. The working class, packed into tenements and laboring in factories, had their own version of New Year's festivities. While the upper crust was busy waltzing, the common folk took to the streets, their celebrations fueled by simple pleasures, and occasionally a bit of mischief. Street parties with makeshift bands and impromptu dances were the order of the day or night, rather, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be dimmed by circumstance. And talk about a democratization of celebration. As the century progressed, these public gatherings started to blur the lines between social classes. The shared experience of ringing in the new year became a rare equalizer, where the cobbler might brush shoulders with the banker, if only for a moment. It's a reminder that despite the rigid social hierarchies, the clock striking midnight had a way of leveling the playing field, if only until dawn. Of course, no discussion of 19th century New Year's would be complete without tipping our hat to the most iconic tradition of all, the Times Square ball drop, which made its debut in 1907. Okay, so we're cheating a bit on the timeline, but bear with me. This was the finale of a century's worth of transformation. A crystal ball descending from above, illuminating a city that had become the symbol of modernity. The first ball was made of iron and wood, weighed 700 pounds, and was adorned with 125-watt light bulbs. Not exactly energy efficient, but it was a beacon of the future, nonetheless. Now, let's circle back to the legacy of those early settlers and their bonfires and bells. You might think they'd be lost in the glitter of urban celebrations, but not so fast. The essence of those early days, community, resilience, and a touch of audacity, still underpins our modern New Year's traditions. That's right, every time you raise a glass or join a countdown, you're echoing the same spirit that drove settlers to light up the night and drown out the dark with clanging bells. And what of the lessons we might glean from this journey through time? Well, history has a funny way of reminding us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Our ancestors' blend of hope and pragmatism rings true today, whether you're navigating a pandemic or just trying to keep your resolutions past January 2nd. It's a testament to the enduring human need to mark time, to celebrate survival, and to step boldly into the future, no matter how uncertain it may be. Ultimately, the story of New Year's in America is one of evolution and adaptation, a testament to the resilience of tradition even in the face of rapid change. From the flickering bonfires of early settlers to the dazzling lights of Times Square, the core remains. A celebration of life, a collective breath before the plunge into a new year. And if history tells us anything, it's that while the trappings may change, the heart of the celebration, our hopes, dreams, and the stubborn belief in a better tomorrow remains as steadfast as ever. So, as you ring in the next year, take a moment to appreciate the legacy you're part of, a tradition as old as the hills and as fresh as the dawn. Cheers to that, and see you on the other side. In the late 13th century, while Europe was busy embroiling itself in feudal squabbles and knights were overdoing the chainmail look, a rather unassuming figure named Osman, I was laying the groundwork for what would become one of history's most formidable empires, the Ottoman Empire. Now, Osman wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon. No, his humble beginnings were more rusty dagger than golden goblet, but that didn't stop him from turning a small Anatolian beylik into an empire that would give Europe a run for its florins. Osman hit the scene in the 1280, a time when Anatolia was a patchwork of small, squabbling states. It was as if someone had taken a medieval map and decided to play a game of geopolitical jigsaw, leaving everyone to fight over the pieces. But Osman had a knack for seeing the bigger picture, transforming this chaotic mosaic into a unified force. And he did it with a bit of strategic genius and a whole lot of ambition. Kind of like if Steve Jobs had been born with a sword instead of a smartphone. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Osman's rise wasn't just about swinging swords and claiming castles, though there was plenty of that. It was also about savvy alliances, and dare we say, a bit of medieval real estate flipping. Imagine monopoly, but with more beheadings. Through strategic marriages and alliances, Osman expanded his territory without spilling more blood than necessary. His marriage to Malhan Hatun, the daughter of a powerful tribal leader, was less about romance and more about acquiring assets. Osman's expansion was nothing short of impressive. By 1300, he had laid the foundations for the empire that would dominate for over 6 centuries. His secret? Well, besides sharp swords and sharper wits, Osman leveraged the power of the Ghazi warriors, frontier fighters who were as fearless as they were ferocious. These guys were the medieval equivalent of adrenaline junkies, always looking to expand their territory and influence. Osman's charisma and leadership turned them into a formidable force, eager to carve out a new realm in the decaying remnants of the Byzantine Empire. Speaking of the Byzantines, one can't help but feel a bit of sympathy for them. They were like the aging rock band trying to stay relevant in a world of new pop sensations. But Osman's Ottomans weren't just a flash in the pan, they had staying power. By 1326, they had captured Bursa, their first major city, and made it the capital. It wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a symbolic one. Bursa became the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, and from there, the Ottomans would launch their campaigns into Europe and beyond. Now let's pause for a moment to debunk some myths. Legend has it that Osman had a prophetic dream where a tree grew from his navel, its branches spreading across the world. It's a nice story, probably as true as my ability to run a marathon in under 2 hours. The truth is, Osman was a practical leader who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. His vision was clear-eyed and grounded in reality, not the stuff of fairy tales. As we move on to the battles that defined Osman's early reign, let's talk about the Battle of Baphius in 1302. This was where Osman truly made his mark. Facing a Byzantine force that outnumbered his own, Osman played it smart. He used the terrain to his advantage and launched a surprise attack that sent the Byzantines scurrying. This victory wasn't just a feather in his cap. It was a game-changer that opened the floodgates for further conquests. But Osman wasn't just about battlefield brilliance. His ability to forge alliances was equally impressive. Take his relationship with the Seljuks, for example. While the Seljuk Sultanate was in decline, Osman maintained a shrewd alliance with them, gaining legitimacy and support without getting entangled in their internal chaos. It was a delicate dance, much like navigating office politics, but with more swords and fewer memos. Osman's successors inherited a burgeoning empire, thanks to his groundwork. But make no mistake, the Ottomans were just getting started. Under Osman, the Ottoman Empire grew from a fledgling state to a force that demanded attention. Sure, it's romantic to imagine Osman as a heroic figure with divine dreams, but the reality is far more compelling. He was a leader who understood the chessboard of his time and played it masterfully, setting the stage for an empire that would stretch from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. As we wrap up this tale of Osman's rise, let's remember that the Ottomans weren't an overnight success. They were a slow burn, a strategic build-up that turned the tides of history. In the grand tapestry of empires, the Ottomans were the ones who knew how to weave their story with both power and precision. And it all started with a man who saw a world of possibilities in a land of fragmented tribes and crumbling empires. Osman's tale is one of ambition, strategy, and a dash of medieval realpolitik. But it's also a reminder that even the mightiest empires begin with a single, determined step. As the Ottomans continued their climb up history's ladder, they found themselves in the capable hands of a man who wasn't just content with the status quo. Enter Suleiman the Magnificent, a sultan whose name alone sounds like a marketing ploy for a blockbuster film. But trust me, his reign had all the intrigue and drama of a Hollywood script, minus the CGI. Let's set the scene. It's 1520, and Suleiman stepping onto the Ottoman Empire's stage, a realm already stretching from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula. Now, you might think inheriting such a sprawling empire would be a breeze, but it's more like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Suleiman had a vision that went beyond mere territorial expansion, though he certainly did a lot of that. His eyes were set on reforming the empire from within, crafting an administrative machine that would make even the most efficient corporate CEOs nod in approval. He introduced a series of legislative changes, known as the Canon, which helped streamline everything from taxation to land ownership. Think of it as the Ottoman Empire's version of hitting refresh on a cluttered desktop. Under Suleiman, the empire's legal system was as organized as a Scandinavian living room. No clutter, all function. Of course, no discussion of Suleiman would be complete without mentioning his military exploits. His campaigns were like a greatest hits tour, with stops all across Europe and the Middle East. But there was one gig that didn't quite go as planned: the Siege of Vienna in 1529. Suleiman marched his troops to the gates of the Habsburg capital, ready to claim another feather in his already crowded cap. But Mother Nature had other ideas, serving up a cocktail of heavy rains and logistical snafus that turned the siege into more of a soggy stalemate. Vienna stood firm, and Suleiman had to retreat, proving that even the most magnificent of rulers occasionally get rained out. In the grand theater of history, it's a reminder that sometimes the weather gets top billing. Meanwhile, inside Suleiman's court, the political drama was as thick as the palace walls. The romanticized image of a sultan lounging on silk cushions while poets recited verses is only part of the picture. Behind the scenes, it was a game of Thrones-level power play. One of the key figures was Hurrem Sultan, Suleiman's wife, and a woman who broke all sorts of norms by wielding significant influence. Known in the West as Roxolana, she was a former slave who rose to power through sheer cunning and charm, proving that the Ottoman court wasn't just a boys' club. Hurrem's ascent is a testament to the fact that the corridors of power were navigated not just with swords, but with sharp minds and sharper tongues. The political intrigue didn't stop there. The infamous rivalry between Suleiman's sons, Mustafa and Selim, is another chapter worth exploring. Mustafa, the popular and capable heir, was the victim of courtly machinations that led to his untimely demise, an event that left a permanent mark on Suleiman's legacy. It's a story with all the elements of a Shakespearean tragedy, complete with betrayal, jealousy, and a father-son showdown that would give Hamlet a run for his money. But let's not forget the economic engine that powered Suleiman's empire. The Ottomans controlled key trade routes between Europe and Asia, raking in profits that would make modern hedge fund managers weep with envy. The empire was a melting pot of cultures and goods, with bustling markets from Istanbul to Cairo. It was an economic powerhouse, driven by a sophisticated system of taxation and trade policies. The Ottomans knew the value of a well-oiled economic machine, and Suleiman made sure every dinar and dirham was put to good use. If only today's budgets were as balanced. Now, when you hear about Suleiman's grand architectural projects, you might think of the majestic mosques and palaces that dotted his empire. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque, with its iconic blue tiles, stands as a testament to Suleiman's love of grandeur. But these weren't just vanity projects. They were statements of power and faith, designed to awe both subjects and rivals alike. Suleiman knew that architecture was not just about bricks and mortar. It was about legacy and influence, a visual reminder of the empire's might. As we delve deeper into Suleiman's reign, remember that the golden age of the Ottoman Empire was a complex tapestry of ambition, reform, and intrigue. It's easy to get swept up in the romanticized tales of sultans and harems, but the reality was far more nuanced. Suleiman's era was a time of significant change, setting the stage for both triumphs and challenges to come. The empire was at its zenith, but the seeds of future struggles were already being sown. So stay tuned, because the story of the Ottomans is far from over. We've got plenty more history to unravel. So, as we wave farewell to Suleiman the Magnificent's golden reign, let's pause to admire the empire's zenith without getting too comfy in our silk cushions. It's the 17th century, and the Ottoman Empire is striding confidently along the shores of the Mediterranean, its influence sprawling across 3 continents. But here's the kicker. Even at its peak, the empire was already feeling the first tremors of its future challenges. You see, empire isn't just about conquering lands or building monumental mosques. It's about managing what you've got. And sometimes, even the most magnificent empires can't dodge the economic potholes that lie ahead. First up on our radar is the economic whirlwind of the 17th century. Picture this. The Ottomans, like a well-dressed CEO at a gala, were smack dab in the middle of lucrative trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. But here's where the plot thickens. Instead of a smooth sail on the seas of commerce, the Ottomans faced choppy waters. Inflation was the uninvited guest nobody wanted, yet it managed to crash the party anyway. A flood of silver from the New World was flowing into Europe, and this metallic avalanche meant that prices skyrocketed like a caffeinated squirrel. The Ottoman currency, once as solid as a sultan's throne, started to wobble on its pedestal. Now, let's talk tulips. Yes, you heard that right. Tulips. The Ottoman Empire was not immune to the siren call of these colorful blooms, which sparked the infamous tulip mania. Picture the 1630. Everyone from Istanbul's elite to its street vendors was in a frenzy over these flowers. They weren't just buying tulips, they were investing in them like they were the hardest stock on Wall Street. The price of a single bulb could rival a luxury carriage or even a decent house. Sure, tulips were pretty, but they weren't exactly edible or useful in warfare. Inevitably, the bubble burst, and when it did, it left an economic hangover more painful than a sultan's wrath. It's a classic tale of market speculation gone wild, proving that even the grandest empires can get caught up in the allure of a bad investment. While the tulips were wreaking havoc on the economy, the empire faced another pest, internal strife. The Ottomans, for all their outward might, were grappling with a bit of a family feud. Picture a Thanksgiving dinner, but with more turbans and fewer mashed potatoes. The Sultanate's succession practices were, to put it mildly, a mess. Instead of the eldest son automatically inheriting the throne, it was a free-for-all among the Sultan's male relatives, a practice that could make reality TV producers salivate. This chaotic scramble for power often led to fratricide, a brutal game of musical chairs where the stakes were life and death. The practice was officially outlawed by Ahmed I in 1603, but the damage to internal stability was already done. Externally, the Ottomans were facing their fair share of headaches too. European powers were getting feistier, and they weren't content to sit idly by while the Ottomans basked in their glory. The Habsburgs and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were like pesky neighbors who wouldn't stop throwing raucous parties. Only these parties involved armies and sieges. The Ottomans found themselves engaged in a series of wars that drained both resources and morale. Sure, the empire had a reputation for military prowess, but even the best armies can't fight forever without some serious R&R. Let's not forget the issue of corruption. The Ottoman bureaucracy, once a well-oiled machine, was starting to rust. Bribery and graft became as common as Turkish delight at a bazaar. The empire's officials, from provincial governors to tax collectors, were more interested in lining their pockets than ensuring the sultan's coffers were full. This administrative decay meant that the empire, once a beacon of centralized power, began to fracture from within. It's as if the empire was a grand theater production where the actors forgot their lines, and the backstage crew was more interested in pocketing the ticket sales. Amidst these struggles, the empire's cultural and scientific achievements continued to shine, albeit dimly. The Ottomans were no strangers to the arts and sciences, and they had long been patrons of both. But the 17th century saw a gradual decline in their innovative edge. While Europe was riding the waves of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, the Ottomans were somewhat adrift. It's not that they were devoid of intellectual pursuits, but the spark that had once fueled their advances was flickering. The once vibrant exchange of ideas started to stutter, overshadowed by the empire's internal and external woes. Despite these challenges, the Ottoman Empire remained a formidable force, at least on the map. But maps can be deceiving. Beneath the surface, the empire was like a magnificent tapestry with threads starting to fray. The Ottomans, once the envy of empires, were learning that maintaining an empire required more than might and majesty. It required adaptability and reform, qualities that were in short supply at the time. So, as we draw the curtain on this chapter of the Ottoman saga, remember that the empire's decline wasn't a dramatic fall from grace, but rather a slow unraveling. The seeds of its challenges were sown during its zenith, their roots spreading quietly but persistently. As we move forward, the story of the Ottomans will continue to unfold, revealing more twists, turns, and lessons from history's grand stage. Stay tuned, because this tale is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the most intriguing, is yet to come. As the threads of the Ottoman tapestry continue to fray, the empire found itself standing at the crossroads of the 18th and 19th centuries, desperately trying to keep its fez on straight, while the world around it raced ahead in a blur of steam engines and industrial revolutions. The Ottomans were like an aging rock star trying to keep up with the latest musical trends. Think Elvis trying to out-disco the Bee Gees. Enter Mahmud Roman II, the Sultan who decided it was high time the empire got a makeover. Picture him as the ultimate fixer-upper enthusiast, armed with grand ideas and a fervor for reform. His reign began in 1808 and was marked by a series of modernization attempts akin to a midlife crisis. Only instead of buying a red convertible, Mahmud opted for military and administrative reforms. Mahmud Roman II realized that the Janissary Corps, the once elite military force, had become more of a rowdy fraternity with too many keggers and not enough discipline. By 1826, in what came to be known as the Auspicious Incident, Mahmud Roman II decided to disband them. And by disband, I mean he ordered a rather dramatic cleanup operation that left the Janissaries in no position to argue, permanently. It was a bold move, like firing your entire board of directors and replacing them with a fresh crop of eager interns. The Janissaries had long been a thorn in the side of reform, so Mahmud's drastic action was a necessary step in clearing the path for his vision of a modern army. The Sultan's ambitions didn't stop there. He also introduced Western-style clothing reforms, forcing his officials to swap their traditional robes for more European attire. It was like a historical episode of what not to wear, only with a bit more imperial pressure. The fez, that iconic red hat, became a symbol of this new look, practical and fashionable, if not entirely welcomed by everyone. Mahmud Roman II reforms extended to the administration, where he sought to centralize power and curb the autonomy of provincial governors. He was essentially trying to wrangle a herd of cats, each vying for their own fiefdom of influence. But Mahmud was determined to transform the Ottoman bureaucracy into a sleek, efficient machine, a goal that was ambitious, to say the least. His efforts laid the groundwork for the Tanzimat reforms, a series of sweeping changes that would define the next chapter of Ottoman history. Now, about those Tanzimat reforms. They were the Ottoman Empire's grand attempt to play catch-up with the industrial and political revolutions sweeping across Europe. Kicking off in 1839 and lasting until 1876, these reforms were the empire's version of hitting the gym after years of indulgence. Lots of sweat, a few gains, but ultimately a struggle to shed the old habits. The Tanzimat era was marked by the introduction of modern legal codes, designed to replace the patchwork of religious and customary laws with something resembling a coherent legal system. The Ottomans were essentially trying to download the latest update for their societal operating system, no small feat in an empire as culturally and religiously diverse as theirs. Education reform was also high on the agenda, with new schools and universities popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The aim was to nurture a new generation of civil servants and military officers, educated in the ways of science and reason. It was a noble effort, but one that often clashed with the deeply ingrained traditions of the empire. Economically, the Tanzimat was a mixed bag. Efforts to modernize the economy included infrastructure projects like railways and telegraphs, which promised to shrink the vast distances within the empire and boost trade. Yet, despite these shiny new toys, the empire's finances were still a tangled mess of debt and deficit. The Ottomans were like a teenager with a brand new smartphone, but no money to pay the phone bill. Meanwhile, the empire's territorial holdings were slipping through its fingers like sand at a beach. The 19th century saw significant territorial losses, with regions like Greece, Serbia, and Egypt either gaining independence or slipping into the sphere of European influence. The Ottoman Empire was like a once great mansion, slowly being sold off room by room, each loss a reminder of its dwindling power. The increasing influence of European powers was an ever-present spectre. The so-called sick man of Europe was subjected to the whims of the great powers, who treated the Ottoman lands like a buffet where everyone wanted a taste. This period saw the empire caught in the web of European realpolitik, its sovereignty often undermined by treaties and alliances crafted in distant capitals. Despite these challenges, there were moments of triumph and resilience. The Crimean War, 1853–1856, offered a flicker of Ottoman pride when the empire, allied with Britain and France, held its ground against Russia. However, the war also underscored the empire's reliance on European support, a dependency that was both a lifeline and a leash. As the 19th century trudged on, the Ottomans continued to grapple with the realities of modernization. The empire's leaders were like jugglers, trying to keep reform, tradition, and external pressures all in the air without letting anything crash to the ground. It was a delicate balancing act, fraught with risks and potential pitfalls. Mahmud Roman II and the Tanzimat reformers may not have achieved all their lofty goals, but their efforts were a testament to the resilience of the Ottoman spirit. They were fighting against the tide of history, determined to carve out a future for an empire that refused to fade quietly into the annals of history. As we look ahead, the story of the Ottoman Empire will continue to unfold, revealing more twists, turns, and lessons from history's grand stage. The empire's journey through the 18th and 19th centuries was a roller coaster of ambition and failure, a testament to the complexity and unpredictability of historical change. Stay tuned, because the Ottoman's tale is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the most intriguing, is yet to come. As we barrel into the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire is like that old, creaky ship trying to navigate stormy seas while hauling more barnacles than treasure. The world around it is shifting dramatically, with empires collapsing and new ideologies sprouting like weeds in a neglected garden. Here we go into the final act of this centuries-long drama. The Ottoman Empire, by the time World War I rolls around, is struggling to keep up with the frenetic pace of history. They found themselves reluctantly siding with the Central Powers, which included Germany and Austria-Hungary. This was a bit like joining the losing team at halftime because they promised more snacks. The Ottomans thought they might score some territorial gains, but what they got instead was a front-row seat to their own disintegration. The war effort was a costly affair. We're talking about a government that was already financially strapped, signing up for a war that would drain resources faster than a leaky bucket. By 1918, the empire was staggering like a boxer who's taken one too many punches. Casualties were staggering, with over 2 million soldiers either dead or wounded. The infrastructure was in tatters, and the economy was more wrecked than a teenager's first car. Now, let's talk about the Treaty of Sevres in 1920, which was essentially the Allies' way of saying, "Thanks for playing, but you're out." This treaty carved up the Ottoman territories like a Thanksgiving turkey, dishing out slices to the likes of Britain, France, Greece, and Italy. Imagine being invited to a feast only to find out you're the main course. The treaty left the Ottomans with just a sliver of land in Anatolia, a shadow of their former grandeur. But hold on, because here comes a plot twist worthy of a soap opera. Enter Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a military officer with a vision sharper than a scimitar. He wasn't about to let the Ottomans go down without a fight. In the aftermath of Sevres, Ataturk spearheaded a nationalist movement, rallying the people to resist the partition of their homeland. The Greco-Turkish War, 1919–1922, became the stage for this showdown, and spoiler alert, Ataturk's forces emerged victorious. By 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished, and the empire that had once spanned continents was officially laid to rest. On October 29, 1923, Ataturk proclaimed the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, and he became its first president. Under his leadership, Turkey underwent a series of radical reforms that would make even the most ambitious makeover show envious. We're talking about abolishing the caliphate, introducing secular laws, and swapping out the Arabic script for the Latin alphabet. Ataturk was like a one-man revolution, dragging Turkey into the modern age with the tenacity of a bulldog. His reforms weren't just cosmetic. They were transformative, laying the foundation for a new national identity. Ataturk's vision was clear. Turkey would be a secular, democratic nation-state, a far cry from the theocratic empire it once was. The man was nothing if not determined, and he had the charisma to back it up. In fact, his influence was so profound that his surname, Ataturk, meaning father of the Turks, was bestowed upon him by a grateful nation. Now, as we reflect on the legacy of the Ottoman Empire, it's tempting to get swept up in the romanticized tales of sultans and harems, of conquests and grandeur. But let's not kid ourselves. The collapse wasn't just a dramatic fall from grace. It was a gradual unraveling, woven from threads of economic strain, military overreach, and political fragmentation. Yet, the empire's impact lingers. Its centuries-long rule shaped the cultural, political, and social landscapes of the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Europe. The Ottoman legacy is as complex as a Byzantine mosaic, with its pieces forming a picture of both unity and division. The empire left a rich tapestry of cultural heritage, from architectural marvels like Istanbul's Hagia Sophia to culinary contributions that spice up tables around the world. The myths surrounding the Ottoman decline are as captivating as they are misleading. The idea of a sudden collapse ignores the resilience that kept the empire afloat for so long. The Ottomans were no strangers to reinvention, adapting to changing circumstances with a resilience that defies a single narrative. Their story is a testament to the fact that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of shades and hues, reflecting the complexity of human endeavors. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the Ottoman Empire for what it was. A grand experiment in governance that spanned centuries, a testament to human ambition and fallibility. The empire's story is a reminder that history is as much about the people who lived it as it is about the empires they built and lost. So here's to the Ottomans, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are ultimately human, filled with both triumphs and tribulations. Stay curious, my friends, because history never truly ends. It's just waiting for the next storyteller to pick up the narrative. The 9th century was a time when the Khmer Empire decided to give the world a taste of what it meant to go big or go home. And by big, I mean they were ready to carve out a civilization so grand that even future historians would have to rub their eyes twice. Welcome to the era of the Khmer, an empire so ambitious, it almost makes modern-day startups look like they're playing in the kiddie pool. We're talking vast lands stretching across what we now call Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, all ruled by a society that had a thing for rice and elephants. Yes, you heard that right, elephants. But hang tight, we'll get to those pachyderm powerhouses soon enough. Let's start with rice, the humble grain that was pretty much the Khmer Empire's version of Wi-Fi. It connected everyone and drove everything. The Khmer were rice aficionados, cultivating vast quantities on a scale that would make today's farmers green with envy. Thanks to an intricate system of canals and reservoirs, they turned the land into a veritable breadbasket, or more accurately, a rice bowl. This wasn't your average backyard garden, though. We're talking thousands of hectares of paddies, all meticulously planned and executed. Rice was the Khmer's secret sauce, fueling not only stomachs, but also the empire's economy. It was the lifeblood that allowed them to expand their territory and influence, much like how a good internet connection allows you to binge-watch your favorite series without interruption. Enter Jayavarman II, the man who saw the sprawling potential of this rice-fueled land and thought, yeah, I could rule all of this. In 802 AD, Jayavarman II declared himself the Chakravartin, or Universal Monarch, a title that sounds like something out of a superhero flick, but was, in fact, his way of saying, I'm the boss now. He wasn't just about flashy titles, though. Jayavarman II was a master strategist, unifying the squabbling regional powers under a central authority. He did this not just with charisma, but with an understanding of how to wield both carrot and stick. Well, more like rice and spear in this case. And let's talk about those elephants. Imagine an army where the cavalry weighs in at several tons each and can crush foes underfoot like they're stepping on particularly crunchy leaves. The Khmer used elephants not just as beasts of burden, but as instruments of war. It's one thing to face an enemy soldier on horseback. It's another to stare down an elephantine juggernaut. These creatures were the tanks of the ancient world, and the Khmer loved them for it. They were a statement, a massive, trumpeting exclamation mark on the battlefield. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Unifying the Khmer Empire was a bit like herding cats, except the cats were minor kings and warlords who weren't exactly thrilled about giving up their slice of the pie. Jayavarman II had to navigate a complex web of alliances and enmities, turning potential rivals into allies, or more often, making sure they were too busy dealing with local skirmishes to cause him any real trouble. It was a delicate balancing act, the kind that keeps you up at night worrying about who's plotting behind your back. And let's not sugarcoat it. Life in the Khmer Empire wasn't all glorious temples and grand feasts. The power dynamics were as complex as a soap opera subplot, with everyone from the royal family to the local chieftains jockeying for position. The empire's ambitions meant constant expansion, and with it, the need for more labor, more resources, and more control. The construction of monumental projects, such as the awe-inspiring Angkor Wat, required a massive workforce, which often meant corvée labor, a fancy term for what was essentially state-mandated labor. It's the kind of detail that doesn't make it into the romanticized narratives, but was a reality for the thousands who toiled under the blazing sun. Yet, despite the gritty underbelly of empire building, there's an undeniable allure to the grandeur of the Khmer Empire. It's the kind of story that captures the imagination, tales of mighty rulers, epic battles, and architectural wonders. The myths and legends that have grown up around the empire are as much a part of its history as the stones of Angkor Wat itself. But behind every legend, there's a kernel of truth, and often a stack of unpaid laborers working overtime. So, as we delve deeper into the story of the Khmer Empire, remember that it's a tale of ambition and power, of dreams as vast as the rice fields that fueled them. It's a story where the reality was often as complex and multifaceted as the intricate carvings on their temples. And like all great stories, it's one that deserves to be told in all its messy, magnificent detail. Stay tuned, because the plot only thickens from here. Now, let's get into the real story of Angkor Wat, a masterpiece that stands not just as a symbol of the Khmer Empire's architectural genius, but also as a testament to their sheer ability to get things done, even when the task sounds like something only an ancient deity could pull off. Picture this: 2 million blocks of sandstone, each weighing as much as an overstuffed SUV, hauled from a quarry over 50 kilometers away. That's right, they didn't have the luxury of a Home Depot around the corner. And if you think your morning commute is bad, try moving a few of those bad boys across rivers and dense jungles. This was the ultimate logistical nightmare, an ancient construction project that makes modern urban planning look like a cakewalk. But let's give credit where credit is due. The Khmer were nothing if not resourceful. They dug canals, floated these massive stones on rafts, and then orchestrated a human conveyor belt to shuttle them to the construction site. It was a feat of coordination that required thousands of laborers working in tandem like a well-oiled machine, long before anyone had thought to patent the term assembly line. Forget about digital project management tools. These ancient project managers had to rely on good old-fashioned shouting and a fair amount of prayer. One can only imagine the endless meetings that must have taken place, perhaps around a large stone table, with someone inevitably suggesting, "Have we tried using more elephants?" Speaking of elephants, they were the real MVPs here, the heavy lifters of this operation. These gentle giants were used to carry the sandstone blocks, making them not just war machines, but also the backbone of Khmer civil engineering. It's as if the Khmer decided to merge their love for elephants with their flair for monumental architecture, creating a construction crew that would turn heads even today. Now, while we're on the topic of who's who in Angkor Wat's construction, let's not forget the craftsmen and artisans. These folks weren't just laying stone, they were breathing life into it. Intricate carvings depicting Hindu cosmology, legendary battles, and celestial dancers, known as apsaras, adorn the temple's walls, transforming sandstone into storytelling. And who was the mastermind behind all this? King Suryavarman II, the man with a vision so grand it makes Disneyland look like a roadside attraction. He wasn't building just any temple, he was creating the largest religious monument in the world. Think of it as his LinkedIn profile, ambitious, detail-oriented, and not afraid to take on a challenge. But why go to such lengths? Why build something so grand that even centuries later it remains the world's largest religious monument? Well, Angkor Wat wasn't just a temple. It was a complex political statement wrapped in sandstone. Its very design was a cosmic map, a representation of Mount Meru, the center of the universe in Hindu cosmology. By aligning himself with this celestial geography, Suryavarman was essentially saying, "I've got the backing of the universe, so you better believe I'm the rightful king." Yet, like any good story, Angkor Wat is shrouded in myths that are as intriguing as they are misleading. One popular legend suggests that the temple was built in a single night by divine intervention. As much as we'd love to believe in such supernatural efficiency, the reality is a bit more down-to-earth. It took an estimated 30 years and tens of thousands of workers to complete Angkor Wat. So, no, it wasn't a case of abracadabra and voila, but rather decades of back-breaking labor. Then there's the romantic notion that Angkor Wat was abandoned and lost to the jungle before its discovery by French explorers in the 19th century. In truth, the temple was never truly forgotten. It remained a place of pilgrimage and a functioning temple long after the decline of the Khmer Empire. The idea of a lost civilization is a tantalizing tale, sure, but the reality is that Angkor Wat was more like a neglected celebrity, always known, but not always in the limelight. Understanding Angkor Wat's creation also means grasping the economic gears that powered it. This wasn't just a spiritual endeavor, it was an economic powerhouse. The massive workforce needed to build and maintain the temple was supported by the surrounding rice fields, those ever-reliable engines of the Khmer economy. The temple complex was essentially a city within a city, with its own community of workers, priests, and royals, all sustained by the empire's agricultural prowess. So, what drove the Khmer to undertake such a monumental task? It was a mix of religious devotion, political ambition, and perhaps a touch of minds bigger than yours syndrome. Angkor Wat was a statement, a way for Suryavarman II to assert his divine right to rule and to cement his legacy in stone. It was a physical embodiment of power, a testament to what the Khmer were capable of when they set their minds and their elephants to the task. Of course, none of this grandeur was without its darker sides. The laborers who toiled long hours under the unforgiving sun were often conscripted through corvée labor, essentially an ancient version of mandatory overtime. These were the unsung heroes, and perhaps the unseen victims of Angkor Wat's creation. Their stories might not be as glorified as those of kings and guards, but they are just as vital to understanding the true cost of this architectural wonder. As we unravel the mystery of Angkor Wat, it becomes clear that the temple is more than just a relic of the past. It's a window into the Khmer Empire's aspirations and contradictions, a place where the grandeur of human ambition meets the gritty reality of human labor. The story of Angkor Wat isn't just about stones and statues. It's about people, their dreams, their struggles, and their enduring legacy. As we continue to explore this fascinating chapter in history, remember that each block of sandstone carries with it a story of its own, one that speaks to the heart of what it means to build something that lasts beyond a lifetime. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in the saga of the Khmer Empire. So, we've set the stage with the grandeur of Angkor Wat, but let's shift the spotlight to the people who made this empire tick, both the ones living in opulence and those who were just trying to keep their heads above water. Picture the Khmer Empire's social structure as a pyramid. No, not the kind you're thinking of with mummies and hieroglyphs, but a social hierarchy where the peak was glittering with gold while the base was, well, holding everything up. At the top, we had the king, the ultimate big cheese, basking in divine legitimacy and surrounded by an entourage that would make a rock star's posse look sparse. These elites lived in lavish wooden palaces. Stone was reserved for temples, the eternal abodes of gods, not mere mortals, complete with intricate carvings and lush gardens. They were the ones who could afford to worry about abstract concepts like cosmic harmony and spiritual legacy while sipping on imported luxuries and wearing silk that made your average toga look like a rag. But let's not get swept away by the allure of royal indulgence. This wasn't just a scene out of lifestyles of the rich and famous. It was a complex web of power and politics, where everyone from high-ranking officials to favored priests had their fingers in the empire's cookie jar. If you think modern boardrooms are full of backstabbing and intrigue, you've yet to read the transcripts of a 12th century Khmer council meeting. These folks were playing a high-stakes Game of Thrones long before HBO got in on the action. Meanwhile, as the elite were busy plotting their next move in the political chessboard, the commoners were living a vastly different reality. They were the backbone of the empire, the ones who made sure the rice paddies were filled, the canals flowed smoothly, and the elephants were well fed and ready for their next gig, be it construction or conquest. Their lives were dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of the state. Think of them as the original gig economy workers, minus the app, and with a lot more manual labor. These folks lived in stilted houses, simple yet practical, designed to withstand the monsoon floods that swept across the land with the kind of regularity that made even the most reliable Swiss train jealous. Their days were filled with hard work, whether in the fields, crafting tools, or producing textiles. Theirs was a life of subsistence, an existence often precariously balanced between harvests and hunger. And if you're picturing this as some quaint, pastoral existence, think again. It was grueling, relentless work, with little room for advancement or change. Now, let's toss in a primary source for good measure. The Chinese diplomat Zhu Daguan visited the Khmer capital in the late 13th century and left us a travelogue that reads like a medieval TripAdvisor review. He noted the opulence of the royal court, but he also observed the stark realities of peasant life. According to Zhu, these commoners were taxed heavily, not just in grain, but in labor, with corvée duties that could sweep them away from their homes for months at a time. It's like being called up for jury duty, but instead of deciding a verdict, you're building a temple or digging canals. It's worth noting that Zhu Daguan's accounts are colored by his own cultural lens. He was both fascinated and bewildered by the Khmer way of life, and while he offers invaluable insights, his perspective is a reminder of the importance of cross-cultural understanding, or lack thereof, in historical narratives. So, how did this social structure hold together? The answer involves a mix of religious belief, political might, and a sprinkle of fear. The Khmer king wasn't just a ruler. He was seen as a Divaraja, a guard king, a concept that essentially meant divine endorsement was woven into the royal fabric. This spiritual buy-in created a societal order where questioning authority wasn't just rebellious, it was blasphemous. But that doesn't mean the system was unshakable. Like any good story, the Khmer Empire's history is filled with coups, rebellions, and power struggles. Imagine trying to balance a stack of Jenga blocks while everyone around you is pulling at the pieces. It's a wonder anything stayed upright. The romanticized view of the Khmer Empire's golden age often glosses over these gritty realities, painting a picture of harmony and prosperity. But the truth is more nuanced. This was an empire built on the backs of its people, where the grandeur of the elite was inextricably linked to the labor of the commoners. It's a tale as old as time, one that echoes through centuries, reminding us that while kings and temples may stand the test of time, the stories of those who toiled in their shadows often fade into the background. As we peel back the layers of the Khmer Empire, it becomes clear that the real story is one of contrasts, between wealth and poverty, power and subjugation, legend and reality. Each stone of Angkor Wat may tell a tale of divine kingship, but it's the silent echoes of the laborers' sweat and toil that whisper the truth of their world. Stay with us as we continue to delve into the intricacies of this fascinating empire, exploring the forces that shaped its rise and eventual fall. Because just like any good saga, there's always more beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And trust me, the next chapters are bound to be just as riveting. As we continue our dive into the Khmer Empire, it's time to tackle the ultimate plot twist in their saga, the decline. If you thought this was going to be a simple case of, and then they all lived happily ever after, think again. This is history, not a fairy tale, and the empire's decline is as layered as a millefeuille pastry, without the sweet ending. First, let's debunk the myth that the Khmer Empire's downfall was an overnight sensation, like a viral video. No, this was more like watching a 3-hour film, but with a slow-burning plot. The empire didn't implode with a single catastrophic event. It unraveled gradually over the 15th century. Imagine trying to fix a leaky faucet in a house where the plumbing is failing. You might not notice the problem at first, but eventually you're ankle-deep in water, wondering where it all went wrong. The decline involved a perfect storm of environmental hiccups, economic strains, and political missteps. Starting with the environment, the empire's hydraulic city was both its crowning achievement and its Achilles heel. The Khmer had mastered water management, building an extensive network of canals, reservoirs, and barrays that could make a modern civil engineer weep with envy. But nature, as it turns out, doesn't always play nice. Enter climate change, stage left. Around the 14th century, the region experienced a series of severe droughts, followed by intense monsoons. The Khmer's sophisticated water system was like a top-tier smartphone, fantastic when it works, a nightmare when it doesn't. The droughts meant less water for agriculture, directly hitting food production, while the monsoons caused devastating floods, damaging infrastructure. It's like Mother Nature decided to play a cruel game of, can you handle this? Yet the empire's problems weren't just waterlogged. Economically, the Khmer were feeling the pinch. The empire's reliance on its agricultural base, primarily rice, meant that any disruption to farming hit hard. And let's face it, when your empire's prosperity is tied to rice paddies, you're walking a tightrope without a safety net. The economic downturn made it difficult to maintain the grandiose projects and the lavish lifestyle of the elite. Imagine trying to keep up with the Joneses when your bank account's running on empty. Then there were the external invasions. Picture this. It's the medieval version of Game of Thrones, and everyone wants a piece of the action. By the 15th century, the Ayutthaya Kingdom, a rising power in present-day Thailand, saw the Khmer Empire as ripe for the picking. They launched a series of attacks, further destabilizing a region already teetering on the edge. It was like watching a heavyweight boxing match where one fighter is already on the ropes. And let's talk mismanagement. The Khmer leadership seemed to have missed the memo on adaptability. Instead of innovating, they doubled down on their old ways, much like a company refusing to switch from fax machines to email. The over-reliance on the hydraulic city, without considering its vulnerabilities, was akin to putting all your eggs in a very leaky basket. They were caught in a cycle of trying to fix problems with the same solutions that no longer worked. While we're at it, let's not forget the internal strife and power struggles that were as much a part of the empire's DNA as its temples. The royal court was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing, with factions vying for control. Imagine a soap opera, but with more elephants and fewer commercial breaks. These internal conflicts weakened the central authority, making it even harder to respond effectively to external threats. Now, onto the myth-busting. The romantic notion of a sudden, mysterious disappearance of the Khmer civilization is just that, a romantic notion. The idea that Angkor was lost and swallowed by the jungle until it was discovered by 19th-century Europeans is a classic case of historical hyperbole. In reality, Angkor was never truly abandoned. It remained a religious and cultural hub well into the post-imperial period. The city was more like a celebrity who stepped out of the spotlight rather than a star that faded away. So, what does all this tell us? The decline of the Khmer Empire wasn't due to a single, dramatic fall, but a complex interplay of various factors. It was a slow unraveling, like watching a carefully woven tapestry come undone thread by thread. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to the caprices of nature, the economy, and human ambition. As we move forward in our exploration, remember that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. The Khmer Empire's decline is a testament to the intricate dance of power, environment, and human folly. So stay tuned, because the final chapter of this saga promises even more revelations and insights into the lessons we can learn from the past. The story isn't over yet, and who knows what twists lie ahead. As we delve into the final act of this historical epic, let's fast forward a few centuries to the 19th century, when the Western world rediscovered Angkor Wat. Spoiler alert, the Grand Temple complex didn't just pop out of nowhere like a forgotten relic in your attic. Instead, it was more like a celebrity re-entering the limelight, ready for a comeback tour. French explorer Henry Mauhat is often credited with putting Angkor Wat back on the map in 1860, but let's not kid ourselves. He was neither the first nor the only one to stumble upon it. The locals knew it was there the whole time. Thank you very much. Mauhat's romanticized accounts of Angkor Wat as a lost city, hidden in the jungle, captured the imagination of a Europe eager to feast on tales of exotic lands. His descriptions were the 1860 equivalent of a viral YouTube travel vlog, complete with hyperbolic language and a little artistic license. And while Mauhat's narrative painted a picture of an ancient civilization swallowed by time, the reality was more mundane. Angkor Wat was still a functioning religious site, albeit one that had seen better days. The Western fascination with Angkor Wat and the Khmer Empire wasn't just about marveling at ancient ruins. It was also about a broader narrative, the colonial mindset that viewed Southeast Asia as a place of mystery and adventure, a tableau waiting to be explored, documented, and ultimately controlled. The irony here is as thick as the jungle foliage. A temple complex built as a testament to Khmer sovereignty and divine kingship became a symbol of the very colonialism that sought to dominate it. Jump to the 20th century, and Angkor Wat takes on a new role as a linchpin of Cambodian national identity. In 1953, when Cambodia achieved independence from French colonial rule, Angkor Wat was emblazoned on the national flag, a bold statement of cultural pride and historical continuity. It was as if Cambodia was saying, "Look, we've been here, we've built this, and we're not going anywhere." Angkor Wat became more than just a tourist magnet. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of a time when the Khmer Empire was a major player on the world stage. But let's talk about the 21st century, where Angkor Wat has undergone yet another transformation. The temple complex isn't just a site of pilgrimage or scholarly interest. It's become an Instagram hotspot, the backdrop for countless selfies, each hashtagged into the digital ether. This is where the irony reaches its peak. A monument of religious devotion, built as a cosmic map and political statement, now serves as a scenic prop for social media influencers. It's like using the Mona Lisa as a backdrop for a photo shoot about the latest fashion trend. Striking, yes, but perhaps missing the point. Yet, despite the selfie sticks and souvenir stalls, the fascination with Angkor Wat endures. There's something about the grandeur and mystery of the Khmer Empire that continues to captivate imaginations. Maybe it's the audacity of their architectural achievements, or perhaps it's the allure of a lost world glimpsed through the lens of history. Angkor Wat stands as a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder of what can be accomplished with enough vision, manpower, and let's face it, a fair share of forced labor. In reflecting on the legacy of the Khmer Empire, there are lessons to be gleaned for modern society. The rise and fall of this grand civilization are a stark reminder of the impermanence of power. Empires, no matter how mighty, are vulnerable to the whims of nature, the tides of economic change, and the folly of human ambition. The Khmer Empire's hydraulic city, once a marvel of engineering, became its downfall when faced with environmental shifts it couldn't adapt to. It's a cautionary tale for our own time, where climate change and sustainability are pressing concerns. Moreover, the story of Angkor Wat emphasizes the importance of preserving cultural heritage. The temple complex is not just a relic of the past, it's a living monument that continues to shape national identity and inspire awe. Preserving such sites isn't merely about maintaining tourist attractions, it's about safeguarding the stories and achievements of those who came before us. It's about acknowledging the full tapestry of history, including the less glamorous threads of labor and exploitation woven into its fabric. As we wrap up this historical journey, remember that the story of the Khmer Empire isn't just about ancient temples and lost kingdoms. It's about people, those who ruled, those who built, and those who lived under the shadow of monumental ambition. It's a tale as complex as the carvings on Angkor Wat's walls, each detail adding depth to a narrative that spans centuries. So, the next time you see a photo of Angkor Wat, take a moment to look beyond the picture-perfect image and consider the rich history and human endeavor that brought it into being. Because history, like those ancient stones, is enduring, multifaceted, and always waiting to reveal its secrets to those willing to listen. Cleopatra Roman 7. Just saying her name conjures images of grandeur, intrigue, and, well, let's be honest, a whole lot of family drama that would make any modern soap opera look like child's play. Born in 69 BCE, she was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. But before her reign came chaos, and it wasn't just your garden variety political mess. We're talking about a family saga that could give Game of Thrones a run for its money. So, let's dive into the colorful tapestry of Cleopatra's early years, filled with a mix of political chess, sibling squabbles, and a whole lot of eyebrow-raising traditions. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which Cleopatra was part of, had a fascinating blend of Greek and Egyptian influences. It all started with Ptolemy I Soter, a buddy of Alexander the Great, who managed to snag Egypt after Alex's empire was sliced like a birthday cake at a toddler's party. Now, the Ptolemies were Greek, but they ruled over Egypt, creating an odd cultural cocktail. They embraced Egyptian gods and customs when it suited them, but they also clung to their Greek roots like a lifebuoy in a stormy sea of papyrus and pyramids. Cleopatra herself was no slouch when it came to languages. She reportedly spoke 9, including Egyptian, which was a big deal because most of her ancestors didn't bother with the local lingo. Talk about overachieving. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Cleopatra's family tree was more of a tangled bramble of thorns than a majestic oak. The Ptolemies were notorious for their peculiar tradition of sibling marriage. Yep, you heard that right. To keep the royal bloodline pure, or whatever they told themselves, they married brothers to sisters, and sometimes threw in a cousin or two for good measure. It was less about romance, and more about keeping power tightly knit within the family. Cleopatra's own parents, Ptolemy Roman 12 Orleats, known as the flute player, which sounds charming until you realize it's not exactly a compliment, and his sister wife Cleopatra V were a product of this tradition. Growing up in this hotbed of dysfunction, Cleopatra had to be sharp as a tack. Her father, Ptolemy Roman 12, wasn't exactly winning any Father of the Year awards. His reign was marked by political instability, and he was booted out of Egypt not once, but twice. During one of his forced sabbaticals, Cleopatra found herself in the middle of a power struggle with her siblings. Her older sister, Berenice Roman 4, took the throne in his absence, only to be overthrown and executed when Papa Ptolemy made his comeback with a little help from the Romans. If you're keeping score, that's one down in the sibling rivalry. It's no wonder Cleopatra developed a keen sense for politics and survival. In such an environment, the stakes were life and death, not just a squabble over who got the bigger bedroom in the palace. The Ptolemaic penchant for internal strife was legendary, and Cleopatra had several siblings to contend with. There was Arsinoe Roman 4, who would become a rival in later years, and 2 younger brothers, both named Ptolemy, Because why not make things even more confusing? In 51 BCE, when Cleopatra was just 18, her father died, and she co-inherited the throne with her brother Ptolemy Roman 13, who was about 10 at the time. And here's where things start getting really juicy. Now, imagine trying to run a kingdom with your kid brother as co-regent. It's like trying to manage a company with a partner who still needs help tying his shoes. Cleopatra, ever the savvy politician, tried to work around this little hiccup. But Ptolemy Roman 13 had advisors who weren't too keen on his big sister calling the shots. By 48 BCE, Cleopatra found herself ousted from power, fleeing into exile. But if you think that was the end of her story, you clearly don't know Cleopatra. Before long, she mounted a comeback that would make even the most dramatic reality TV star jealous. But that's a tale for another time. For now, just remember that Cleopatra's early years were a masterclass in how to navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics, sibling rivalries, and the peculiarities of a dynasty that thrived on intrigue and inbreeding. In the world of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra wasn't just surviving. She was learning, adapting, and plotting her next move on history's grand chessboard. Cleopatra's early reign was a roller coaster of political maneuvering, familial drama, and a little help from her friends. If by friends, we mean the Romans. So, Cleopatra found herself ousted from power by her brother Ptolemy Roman 13 advisors. What's a deposed queen to do? Well, if you're Cleopatra, you make a beeline for the one guy who can tip the scales in your favor, Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar was in Alexandria in 48 BCE, embroiled in a little spat we know as the Roman Civil War. He was chasing down a rival, Pompey, and the last thing he expected was a royal visitor wrapped up like a Persian rug. Yes, folks, here's where the story takes a turn into legend. Cleopatra, barred from entering the palace, famously had herself smuggled in to meet Caesar by being rolled up in a carpet. It's a tale that sounds like something out of an ancient rom-com, but it worked. Cleopatra knew how to make an entrance, and it wasn't just about the theatrics. She understood the power of first impressions and the weight they carried in the political arena. Meeting Caesar wasn't just a whim, it was a calculated move on the chessboard of international politics. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar often gets painted with the broad brush of romance, but let's not get swept away by Hollywood's rose-tinted glasses. Cleopatra was a shrewd politician first, a romantic second. Sure, Caesar was no slouch. He was a Roman general and statesman with a knack for winning wars and apparently hearts. But for Cleopatra, this alliance was about survival. Her intelligence and political savvy were her true weapons, and she wielded them with the precision of a master strategist. Now, let's take a moment to debunk one of the most persistent myths, Cleopatra's beauty. History has often portrayed her as a seductress who bewitched powerful men with her looks, but the real Cleopatra was more brains than beauty. Ancient coins and busts suggest she had a strong profile, but she probably wouldn't have turned heads for her looks alone. It was her charisma, intellect, and the ability to speak to someone in their own language, literally and figuratively, that made her so captivating. She knew how to work a room, whether it was filled with Egyptian nobles or Roman senators. But back to the economic nitty-gritty. Egypt under Cleopatra was no paradise. The country was grappling with economic troubles, thanks in part to the lavish spending of her predecessors. Ptolemy Roman 12 had left Egypt in a financial quagmire, borrowing heavily from Roman bankers to fund his comeback tour on the throne. To say Cleopatra inherited a mess would be like calling the Nile a creek. Yet, she had the acumen to navigate these choppy waters. She implemented reforms and used her alliance with Rome to stabilize Egypt's economy. The grain-rich Nile Delta was Egypt's ticket to economic stability, and Cleopatra knew how to leverage it. She was essentially a savvy CEO with a nation-sized company to run. Cleopatra's meeting with Caesar was a turning point. With his backing, she regained her throne and even had a son, Ptolemy Roman 15, better known as Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. This was a smart move on her part, securing her legacy and creating a living bond with Rome. It was political dynamite wrapped in a diaper. But let's not forget the backdrop. Egypt was still a land of poverty for many, and Cleopatra's rule, while brilliant, was not without its critics. Her reign was, in many ways, a balancing act between the aspirations of her dynasty and the harsh realities of an empire struggling to maintain its relevance. Cleopatra's story is often romanticized, but it's essential to remember the grit and determination that underpinned her every move. Her alliance with Caesar wasn't a love story, it was a battle strategy. She used every tool at her disposal, from her intellect to her charm, to secure her position and her country's future. And while her methods might not win any awards for ethical governance, they certainly cemented her place as one of history's most formidable rulers. Cleopatra wasn't just surviving. She was strategizing and thriving in a world where the tides of power were as unpredictable as the flooding of the Nile. This wasn't just a tale of love and power. It was a master class in playing the political game, with stakes higher than the pyramids themselves. So, Julius Caesar's untimely exit from the stage of life in 44 BCE left Cleopatra in a bit of a pickle. But being the strategic mastermind she was, Cleopatra didn't waste time mourning. Instead, she set her sights on the next Roman power player, Mark Antony. Antony wasn't just any Roman general. He was the ultimate party animal of the ancient world, a charismatic leader who knew how to work a crowd and a political alliance. Fast forward to 41 BCE, and Cleopatra and Antony are meeting in the city of Tarsus. Cleopatra arrived in style, sailing up the Cydnus River on a barge adorned like a floating palace. Picture this: gold sails, purple-draped oars, and a whole lot of incense. Cleopatra knew the value of spectacle. She was the Beyoncé of her time, and Antony was hooked from the get-go. But let's not get too carried away with the romance. Sure, there was chemistry, but Cleopatra was playing chess, not checkers. Her moves were calculated, and her end game was the survival and prosperity of her kingdom. Antony and Cleopatra's partnership was as much about power as it was about passion. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, and their alliance was sealed with a series of grand revelries that would make Vegas look like a nunnery. Legend has it, they formed a drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, dedicated to out-partying everyone else in the ancient world. But beneath the debauchery was a strategic alliance, a merging of Egyptian resources with Roman military might. Cleopatra knew that Egypt was Antony's key to wealth and support, especially as he was embroiled in a power struggle with Octavian, Caesar's heir. Let's talk economics for a moment. Cleopatra wasn't just throwing parties for the heck of it. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, with the fertile Nile Delta producing enough grain to feed millions. By aligning with Antony, she was securing a market for her bountiful harvests and ensuring that Egypt remained a vital player in the region's economy. Cleopatra was effectively running a multinational corporation with Antony as her business partner, and like any good CEO, she kept her eye on the bottom line. Antony, on the other hand, needed Cleopatra's resources to fund his military campaigns. Roman Republic was a mess. Civil wars, power struggles, you name it, they had it. Antony's rivalry with Octavian was heating up, and he needed Egypt's wealth to bankroll his ambitions. But let's not romanticize Antony too much. He was a brilliant general, but he also had a reputation for being a bit of a loose cannon. In one particularly memorable episode, he ordered an entire city to be relocated and rebuilt because he didn't like the original location. Talk about a man who couldn't take no for an answer. While Antony was busy moving mountains, Cleopatra was working her magic behind the scenes. She was a master of diplomacy, playing Roman factions against each other while securing her position in Egypt. Her relationship with Antony was both a political alliance and a personal partnership, and she navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics with remarkable skill. Sure, they threw wild parties and lived the high life, but Cleopatra was always aware of the stakes. For her, this wasn't just a fling, it was a strategic maneuver to ensure her kingdom's survival. Antony and Cleopatra's relationship was the talk of the ancient world, and their antics provided plenty of fodder for gossip. But let's not forget the economic pressures they faced. Egypt was still recovering from the financial mismanagement of previous rulers. Cleopatra had to balance lavish displays of wealth with the harsh realities of governing a nation. The grain trade was booming, but the costs of maintaining a powerful military ally like Antony were significant. Cleopatra's reign was a juggling act, keeping Egypt afloat while navigating the turbulent waters of Roman politics. Now, let's take a moment to debunk another myth. The idea that Antony was utterly bewitched by Cleopatra's beauty is as romantic as it is misleading. Cleopatra's allure lay in her intelligence and charisma, not just her appearance. Antony wasn't some love-struck fool. He was a seasoned politician who saw in Cleopatra a valuable partner. Their relationship was a meeting of minds as much as anything else, a dynamic duo driven by mutual interests and shared goals. But things weren't all sunshine and roses. Back in Rome, Octavian was watching with a mixture of envy and disdain. He was no fan of Cleopatra, whom he saw as a foreign queen meddling in Roman affairs. Octavian was a master of propaganda, and he painted Antony and Cleopatra as decadent, self-indulgent rulers who posed a threat to Roman values. Cleopatra was cast as the ultimate femme fatale, a manipulative siren leading Antony astray. It was a narrative that stuck, and it played a significant role in the political machinations that followed. In 34 BCE, Antony declared Cleopatra's son Caesarion as his co-ruler and heir, a move that sent shockwaves through Rome. It was a direct challenge to Octavian's claim to power, and it set the stage for a showdown of epic proportions. This was more than just a lover's quarrel. It was a battle for the future of Rome and Egypt, with Cleopatra at the center of the storm. As tensions mounted, Cleopatra found herself caught between two worlds, the splendor of her Egyptian kingdom and the cutthroat politics of Rome. Her alliance with Antony was both her greatest strength and her Achilles' heel. The myth of Cleopatra and Antony as star-crossed lovers might make for a compelling story, but the reality was far more complex. Their relationship was a high-stakes game of political chess, with the fate of empires hanging in the balance. So, while history often remembers them for their passion, it's crucial to recognize the strategic ambitions that underpinned their partnership. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen in love. She was a ruler fighting for her country's future in a world where alliances were as fleeting as the desert wind. As the sun set on their empire, Cleopatra's legacy would be defined not by romance, but by her relentless pursuit of power and her unyielding determination to secure her kingdom's place in history. And as for what happened next, well, let's just say the drama was far from over. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this ancient saga, where battles, betrayals, and the relentless march of history conspire to shape the fate of these legendary figures. Cleopatra's story is a testament to the enduring power of ambition, strategy, and the complex dance of politics in an ever-changing world. The stage was set for a showdown that would put any modern blockbuster to shame. We're talking about the Battle of Actium, folks, where Cleopatra and Mark Antony's ambitions would meet the harsh reality of Roman power politics, with a side of military blunder that would make even the most seasoned general wince. Let's set the scene. It's 31 BCE, and Antony and Cleopatra are holed up in Actium, a strategic spot on the western coast of Greece. They're facing off against Octavian, who, let's be honest, wasn't exactly thrilled about Antony's little stunt of declaring Cleopatra's son Caesarion as Julius Caesar's rightful heir. Octavian saw this as a direct threat to his own claim to power, and he wasn't about to let a couple of lovebirds from Egypt spoil his Roman supremacy party. Now, here's where things get interesting. Antony and Cleopatra had a formidable fleet, 500 ships, give or take, packed with eager sailors ready to defend their queen's honor. But here's the catch. Antony's military strategy was about as coordinated as a cat-herding convention. His forces were split between sea and land, and his leadership was, at best, erratic. Meanwhile, Octavian's right-hand man, Agrippa, was a naval genius. He had fewer ships, but made up for it with superior tactics and a well-trained crew. Talk about a brain versus brawn scenario. As the battle loomed, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was anchored in the Gulf of Ambracia, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But perfect isn't exactly how things played out. In a move that would go down in history as either genius or folly. Hint, it's the latter. Cleopatra decided to take her own squadron of ships and bolt mid-battle. Some say it was a strategic retreat, others argue it was a panic-induced flight. Whatever the reason, Antony, like a smitten teenager, couldn't bear to see her go and abandoned his troops to follow her. Cue the facepalms from his remaining commanders. Octavian, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. With Antony's forces in disarray, Agrippa's fleet swooped in, turning a potential stalemate into a rout. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a military defeat, it was a PR disaster. Rome's propaganda machine went into overdrive, painting Cleopatra as the scheming foreign seductress who led Antony astray. It was an image that would stick like glue, turning the queen into the ultimate scapegoat for Roman sensibilities. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony were licking their wounds. The romantic notion of their tragic love story is tempting, but let's cut through the Hollywood gloss. They were a political duo whose ambitions had come crashing down, victims of their own miscalculations and the relentless march of Roman power. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, reportedly tried to smooth things over with Octavian by turning on the charm. But here's the kicker: Octavian wasn't biding. He was more interested in power than passion, and he had no intention of sharing the spotlight with an Egyptian queen. As the end game approached, Cleopatra's options were dwindling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. The suicide narrative we all know, of Cleopatra clutching an asp to her breast, is as romantic as it is dubious. Sure, it makes for great drama, but let's weigh the facts. The logistics of smuggling a venomous snake into a heavily guarded palace are, let's say, challenging. More likely, Cleopatra faced her demise with the same political acumen she'd wielded all her life, choosing to go out on her own terms rather than face the humiliation of a Roman triumph. Antony, too, found himself cornered. His own suicide is often depicted as a grand gesture of love, but considering his penchant for drama, it's equally plausible he couldn't stomach the ignominy of defeat. In the end, both Antony and Cleopatra were products of their time, caught in the unforgiving gears of history, a testament to the brutal reality that love, ambition, and power rarely mix without explosive results. As for Caesarion, Cleopatra's hope for the future, Octavian saw to it that any threat to his rule was swiftly eliminated. In a move as cold-blooded as it was calculated, Caesarion was reportedly executed on Octavian's orders, the last flicker of Ptolemaic ambition snuffed out to secure the future of the Roman Empire. The downfall of Cleopatra and Antony wasn't just the collapse of a love affair, it was the end of an era. Cleopatra's Egypt, once a beacon of ancient civilization, would be absorbed into the Roman Empire, its riches and culture subsumed by a new world order. But while the romanticized tales of their lives linger, it's the political savvy, the daring gambles, and the human flaws that make Cleopatra and Antony's story one for the ages. They weren't just players in a drama of love and loss. They were architects of their own destinies, navigating a world where the stakes were higher than the pyramids themselves. And so, the curtain falls on Cleopatra and Antony, but the ripples of their ambitions would echo through history, a reminder of the eternal dance between power, politics, and the complexities of the human heart. But hold on to your togas, because the story of Cleopatra doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal, as we continue to unravel the legacy of Egypt's last queen and her indelible mark on history. Stay tuned, history buffs, because the saga is far from over. So, what makes Cleopatra the historical heavyweight she is today? Well, let's dive into the legacy she left behind, which is as tangled and colorful as a basket of Egyptian cotton. Her story is a tapestry woven with Roman propaganda, cultural depictions that swing between fact and fantasy, and her undeniable impact on Egypt's economy and political landscape. Cleopatra's tale is a goldmine for historians, mythbusters, and the occasional Hollywood screenwriter looking for a juicy plot. Now, if you think Cleopatra's legacy was all about romance and tragic endings, think again. The Romans, those masters of spin, had a field day with her story. Octavian, who later became Augustus, knew how to play the PR game like a fiddle. He painted Cleopatra as the ultimate exotic villain, the temptress who led noble Roman men astray. In his narrative, she was less of a queen and more of a scandalous headline. This was a deliberate move to justify his own actions and to rally Roman sentiment against her and Antony. After all, nothing unites people like a common enemy, especially one with a foreign accent and a penchant for gold-laden barges. But let's look at the real Cleopatra, the one who ruled an Egypt fraught with debt and political instability. Her reign was marked by economic savvy that would impress even the most hardened Wall Street tycoon. Sure, her predecessors had left the treasury looking like a college student's bank account the day before payday, empty and desperate. But Cleopatra was no amateur. She leveraged Egypt's greatest asset, the Nile. This river wasn't just a scenic backdrop, it was the lifeblood of Egyptian agriculture, making Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world. Cleopatra understood this and used Egypt's agricultural prowess to stabilize the economy and negotiate power on the Roman stage. Now, fast forward a couple of millennia, and Cleopatra is still captivating our imaginations. She's been the subject of countless plays, books, and movies, each adding a layer of drama and intrigue, often at the expense of historical accuracy. Shakespeare, that bard of Avon, turned Cleopatra into a tragic heroine, while Hollywood turned her into a glamorous seductress draped in jewels and eyeliner. Who can forget Elizabeth Taylor's iconic portrayal in the 1963 epic? It was a box office bomb, but the image of Cleopatra as an opulent queen stuck like glitter at a disco. But peel back the layers of legend, and what do you find? A ruler who was more strategist than seductress, more CEO than lover. Cleopatra was a political animal, a woman who knew how to play the Game of Thrones long before it was cool. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not just matters of the heart. They were calculated moves to ensure her survival and the survival of her kingdom. In a male-dominated world, Cleopatra wielded her intellect and charm like weapons of mass persuasion. Yet, the myths persist. Cleopatra, as the ultimate femme fatale, is a narrative that's hard to shake. Perhaps it's the allure of a powerful woman who dared to defy the norms of her time. Or maybe it's just that we love a good story, even if it strays from the truth. The romanticized version of Cleopatra offers a neat package of love, betrayal, and tragedy, perfect for a rainy day read or a blockbuster film. It's history with a dash of drama, a sprinkle of scandal, and a dollop of decadence. So why does Cleopatra continue to fascinate us? Maybe it's because she embodies the eternal struggle between power and passion, ambition and love. Her story is a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration, a reminder that the path to power is often paved with complexity and contradiction. Cleopatra's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of a well-spun story, one that captures the imagination of each new generation. In the end, Cleopatra was a victim of her own success and a pawn in the grand chess game of Roman politics. But she was also a queen who dared to challenge the status quo, a ruler who used every tool at her disposal to secure her legacy. Her life was a series of high-stakes gambles, some that paid off, others that led to her downfall. Yet through it all, Cleopatra remained a symbol of strength and intrigue, a woman who refused to be defined by the men around her. So, Cleopatra's legacy isn't just about a tragic love story or a glamorous portrayal on screen. It's about a powerful woman who navigated the turbulent waters of politics with skill and determination. It's about a ruler who left an indelible mark on history, not just through her relationships, but through her political acumen and economic foresight. And perhaps most importantly, it's about the enduring fascination with a queen who was as complex and compelling as the world she ruled. As we close the chapter on Cleopatra, remember that her story is more than just the sum of its parts. It's a reminder of the power of narrative, the allure of myth, and the reality of history. Cleopatra's life was a masterclass in the art of ruling, a lesson in the complexities of power, and a testament to the enduring intrigue of one of history's most enigmatic figures. And as long as there are storytellers and historians, Cleopatra's legacy will continue to captivate and inspire, a timeless tale of ambition, strategy, and the eternal dance of power. In the bustling city of Salzburg, 1756, a musical storm was brewing, and its epicenter was a tiny baby named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This kid wasn't just any newborn. He was a prodigy wrapped in powdered wigs and miniature breeches, destined to turn the music world on its head. Mozart was born on January 27th, making him an Aquarius. Not that astrology had anything to do with his genius, but if you believe in that sort of thing, maybe the stars did have a say. Now, if you think your childhood was intense, let's talk about little Wolfgang, whose life was a whirlwind of notes and arpeggios before he could even say symphony. By the age of 5, when most kids are busy learning how to tie their shoes, Mozart was composing music that would make grown men weep. And who was behind this child prodigy's meteoric rise? Enter Leopold Mozart, his father, who was essentially the 18th century version of a stage dad, minus the reality TV show. Leopold was a talented musician himself, but he saw something exceptional in Wolfgang, a spark that needed to be fanned into a raging inferno of genius. The Mozarts weren't exactly rolling in dough, despite what you might assume about a family producing musical gold. They were, in fact, hustling hard to make ends meet, a situation that many modern parents with gifted children might recognize. Leopold saw his son as a ticket to fame and fortune, not just for Wolfgang, but for the whole family. It was a classic case of invest now, reap rewards later. Except the investment was a tiny human with an oversized talent. By 1762, the family embarked on a European tour that would make any modern rock star cringe. Forget your favorite band's grueling tour schedule. The Mozarts were hitting the road hard, playing for anyone who would listen, from the courts of Vienna to the salons of Paris. They covered thousands of miles, crisscrossing the continent in carriages that were about as comfortable as a hay wagon. And remember, this wasn't a quick weekend jaunt. This was a multi-year marathon. Wolfgang, the pint-sized virtuoso, was the star attraction, charming audiences with his keyboard prowess and adorable precociousness. But let's bust a myth while we're at it. Mozart didn't just pop out of the womb playing concertos. His talent was undeniable, sure, but it was fueled by relentless practice and a punishing schedule that would have broken the spirit of many a lesser child. The romantic image of the child prodigy conjures thoughts of effortless brilliance, but the reality was far from it. It was hard work, sweat, and tears. Well, maybe not tears, because Wolfgang reportedly enjoyed himself, but you get the picture. Leopold's ambitious touring was not just about showcasing Wolfgang's talent. It was also about networking, creating connections, and quite frankly, putting bread on the table. The Mozarts were playing the long game, and they played it well. During one of their stops in London, Wolfgang met Johann Christian Bach, the youngest son of Johann Sebastian Bach, who became a significant influence on him. This was no small fry. This was the musical equivalent of getting a nod from a rock legend. The young Mozart soaked it all up like a sponge, and you can bet it showed in his compositions. As they toured, young Mozart's reputation grew, and so did the family's hopes of financial stability. But life wasn't all standing ovations and royal patronage. The economic reality was harsh, and the Mozarts often found themselves at the mercy of capricious patrons and the fickle nature of fame. A lesson for the ages. Talent might open doors, but it doesn't always pay the bills. So next time you hear about a child prodigy, remember young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, whose early years were a heady mix of genius and hard graft. The myth of the untroubled genius is just that, a myth. Mozart's story is a testament to the power of ambition, the grind of constant work, and the sometimes harsh economic realities that drive even the most talented among us. And as we journey deeper into his life, we'll find that this was just the beginning of a truly remarkable, if not always easy, musical journey. Fast forward to the teenage years, and Mozart isn't just twinkling ivories in European courts. He's facing a whole new beast, freelancing in Vienna. If you think the gig economy is a modern invention, well, think again. By the time he was 17, Mozart was already in the thick of it, trying to make a name for himself in one of the most competitive music scenes of the 18th century. Vienna was the place to be for any musician worth their salt, but it was also a city where dreams could quickly turn into financial nightmares. Now, freelancing in Mozart's time didn't involve sending invoices via email or chasing down late payments with sternly worded follow-ups. Nope, it was all about live performances, teaching lessons to the spoiled offspring of the rich, and hoping for a patron who thought your music was worth a few thalers. But competition was fierce, and the Viennese elite were as fickle as a cat with a new toy. One minute they were showering you with applause, and the next, they were on to the next big thing. Mozart might have been a wonderkind, but Vienna was a harsh mistress. To keep the money flowing, he needed to be a maestro of multitasking, juggling composing, performing, and teaching like some sort of 18th century Renaissance man. And while his symphonies and operas were masterpieces, the cash register didn't always chime in harmony. Even back then, artistic genius wasn't a guaranteed ticket to riches. Mozart found himself constantly balancing on the financial tightrope, and let's just say, it didn't always end with a perfect landing. Enter the rivalry that's been talked about for centuries, Mozart versus Salieri. Now, if you've seen Amadeus, you might imagine their feud as an epic battle of wills, with Salieri as the mustache-twirling villain. But let's pump the brakes on that drama. In reality, their relationship was more like a professional rivalry mixed with a dash of mutual respect, and a sprinkling of backhanded compliments. Salieri was a respected composer, and unlike the rumors of him plotting Mozart's downfall, he might have just been the guy who occasionally rolled his eyes at Wolfgang's antics. Still, it's undeniable that the two composers were competing for the same gigs, the same patronage, and the same slice of Vienna's musical pie. Salieri, with his Italian flair, had the court connections and a steady job as the court composer, which Mozart, ever the freelancer, likely envied. But while some sources say Mozart might have been a little salty about Salieri's cushy position, there's little evidence that Salieri wanted anything more than to make good music and get paid. After all, who wouldn't want a stable paycheck in a world where financial security was as elusive as a perfect triple axel? Mozart, despite the occasional financial hiccup, was a musical hustler through and through. He was cranking out operas, symphonies, and concertos faster than you could say classical genius. His opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio, was a hit, and his concerts were generally well attended, although not always as lucrative as he'd hoped. The costs of putting on an opera in Vienna were steep, and Mozart was notorious for not managing his finances with the same precision as his compositions. To make ends meet, he often performed piano concerts with himself as the soloist, a kind of 18th century Kickstarter campaign. Tickets were sold, audiences were wooed, and for a while it seemed like he might just beat the odds. But living the high life in Vienna wasn't cheap. Apartments in the city centre weren't going for peanuts, and Mozart, ever the social butterfly, liked to entertain. His extravagant tastes didn't help his bank balance, and he frequently found himself borrowing money from friends and family to keep the wolves at bay. Despite the financial chaos, Mozart's creativity never wavered. He was like the Energizer Bunny of classical music, continually composing with an energy that was as infectious as it was impressive. But as anyone who's ever tried to live off their art can tell you, creativity doesn't always pay the rent. Mozart's financial struggles were a constant undercurrent to his otherwise brilliant career, a stark reminder that even geniuses need to eat. As we leave this chapter of Mozart's life, remember this: the myth of the carefree genius is just that, a myth. Behind the curtain, Mozart was hustling harder than a street performer at rush hour, battling not just for recognition, but for survival. His story is a testament to the highs and lows of the freelance life, a reminder that even the most gifted among us have to grapple with the harsh realities of economics and competition. So, next time you hear one of his symphonies, remember the grit and grind that went into every note. There's more to Mozart than just the music. There's a relentless pursuit of passion and perseverance that resonates through the ages. As we dive into the crescendo of Mozart's life, let's put on our powdered wigs and ride the musical roller coaster that marked his peak creative years. Buckle up, because this journey is less about smooth sailing and more about thrilling highs and heart-stopping drops, with a few unexpected turns along the way. It was the 1780, the decade when Mozart hit his creative stride like a rock star on a caffeine high. He was churning out masterpieces faster than you can say Ein klein Natchmusik. Speaking of which, that charming little serenade came out in 1787, a tune so iconic it's become the classical equivalent of a catchy pop hit. But as much as we love it today, it wasn't even published until after his death, proof that even geniuses have B-sides. During these years, Mozart's operatic works were turning heads and raising eyebrows. Take The Marriage of Figaro in 1786, for instance. Sure, it's now considered a cornerstone of the operatic repertoire, but back then, it was a daring social commentary that took part charts at aristocratic privilege. Mozart and his librettist, Lorenzo da Ponte, weren't just writing operas, they were throwing shade with a libretto. The opera was a hit in Prague, and received with a mix of enthusiasm and skepticism in Vienna. It was a perfect example of Mozart's ability to blend humor with biting social critique, a feat that would make even the sharpest satirists nod in approval. Next up in his greatest hits, Don Giovanni, premiered in 1787. This opera wasn't just a musical tour de force, it was a full-blown existential crisis set to music. The tale of the infamous libertine was both scandalous and spellbinding, with a finale that sent shivers down spines. It was a bold move, and while it dazzled audiences in Prague, it was met with a more muted reception in Vienna. But hey, genius is rarely appreciated in its own time, right? Now, let's talk about the financial side of things. Despite the applause and accolades, Mozart's wallet often echoed with the sound of emptiness. The man was a master of melody, but his financial acumen was akin to someone trying to balance a checkbook during an earthquake. For instance, his opera productions were costly affairs. Don Giovanni, staged in Prague, was a financial success, but bringing it to Vienna was another story. The expenses for musicians, sets, and costumes were astronomical, and Mozart often found himself investing more than he earned. It was the age-old artist's dilemma: spend money to make art, but end up with a fiscal hangover. And let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Mozart as the starving artist. While he wasn't exactly dining on caviar every night, the man wasn't living in squalor either. Mozart had a taste for the finer things, think fancy clothes, extravagant parties, and a billiards habit that could rival a pool shark. He lived in a well-furnished apartment in Vienna's upscale districts, which wasn't cheap. In fact, he moved residences 11 times in 10 years, often seeking grander accommodations despite his shaky finances. It was like a game of musical chairs, but with real estate. Mozart's keen fashion sense was another drain on his bank account. He enjoyed dressing to impress, sporting embroidered waistcoats and silk stockings that would make even the most dapper gentleman blush. This penchant for style didn't come cheap, but it was all part of the image he cultivated. After all, in the world of 18th-century Vienna, appearances were everything. His love for billiards was legendary, too. It wasn't just a pastime, it was an obsession. Mozart reportedly spent a fair amount of time and money on the billiard table, betting on games with friends and acquaintances. It was a hobby that, while entertaining, didn't exactly contribute to his savings account. It's like the modern-day equivalent of splurging on the latest tech gadgets. Fun, but financially imprudent. Despite these indulgences, Mozart's star continued to rise. His concerts were well attended, and he occasionally secured lucrative commissions. But the cash flow was as unpredictable as the Viennese weather. One minute he was flush, the next borrowing money from friends like Michael Puchberg, who was both a fellow Freemason and an occasional financial lifeline. Mozart's letters to Puchberg are a mix of gratitude and desperation, a testament to the precarious balance of his financial existence. While Mozart's genius shone brightly in his compositions, his popularity during his lifetime was a mixed bag. He was celebrated in Prague, adored by certain segments of Viennese society, yet not fully appreciated by the aristocratic circles that controlled the purse strings. He was a man ahead of his time, a visionary whose true worth would only be recognized posthumously. Fast forward to today, and Mozart is the poster child for musical brilliance. His works are performed worldwide, and his name is synonymous with classical music. The irony, of course, is that the adoration he receives now was a far cry from the financial struggles he faced in life. It's a bittersweet reminder of the fickle nature of fame and the enduring legacy of true artistry. As we pause in this movement of Mozart's life, we'll dive deeper into his final years next. There's much more to uncover about the man behind the myth, the relentless creator who, despite the odds, kept composing until his very last breath. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of his remarkable, if tumultuous, existence. So as we pick up our story, Mozart's life was a symphony of glory notes and missed beats. The 1790 were a period of intense creativity, yet they weren't exactly a waltz through a rose garden. Let's dive into those final years, where Mozart was composing his way through a whirlwind of financial woes and health hiccups, all while the clock ticked ominously toward 1791. First off, let's tackle the myth of Mozart as a perpetually destitute genius. Sure, the guy had more creditors than a modern-day credit card junkie, but he wasn't exactly strumming his lyre in a gutter. It's true that he often struggled financially, but remember, he was living the high life, a lifestyle that demanded a steady flow of cash. His income was more like a roller coaster than a steady stream, fluctuating with the success of each concert or commission. Despite this, he still managed to live in a decent apartment in Vienna, and he wasn't shy about indulging his love for fine clothes and lavish entertainment. Now, about those famous final compositions. Between the Requiem, the Magic Flute, and La Clemenza di Tito, Mozart's output in his last year was nothing short of miraculous. The Requiem in particular has spawned enough myths to fill a tabloid. Picture the scene: Mozart feverishly composing a mass for the dead, believing it was for his own funeral. Spooky, right? Except that's mainly the stuff of sensational stories. The reality: a mysterious patron, Count Franz von Walsegg, commissioned the Requiem, intending to pass it off as his own work. Mozart didn't know the identity of the patron, and while he did struggle with ominous premonitions about his health, he wasn't composing under a literal death sentence. And speaking of health, let's not gloss over the fact that Mozart's body was taking a hit. Living in 18th century Vienna wasn't exactly a spa retreat for the immune system. He suffered from a range of ailments, from rheumatic fever to kidney issues, exacerbated by a lifestyle that included long nights and rich food. The final nail in the coffin, as it were, might have been a bout of what doctors today suspect was streptococcal infection leading to kidney failure. Hardly the stuff of romantic mystery, but a harsh reality of pre-antibiotic life. As for the circumstances of his death on December 5, 1791, let's ditch the drama of poisoning plots and focus on facts. The rumor mill has churned out wild stories, from Salieri as a jealous murderer to Freemason conspiracies. Yet Salieri, despite the rivalries, was not a villain lurking in the shadows with a vial of poison. In truth, Salieri was reportedly devastated by Mozart's death, and there's no credible evidence to support the murder theories. Economically, Mozart's final years were a tightrope walk over an alligator pit. The Austrian economy was having its own issues, thanks to the strain of wars and political unrest. Patronage, the lifeblood for composers, was drying up faster than spilled wine at a royal banquet. Add to that Mozart's inability to curb his spending, and you have a recipe for financial disaster. He was constantly borrowing money from friends, including that ever-patient Michael Puchberg, who seemed to have a heart as big as his wallet. Mozart's letters from this time reveal a man juggling his pride and desperation, seeking loans even as he composed masterpieces. Yet in the midst of these struggles, Mozart's genius shone brighter than ever. The Magic Flute, which premiered just 2 months before his death, was a smashing success. It was a Singspiel, a German opera with spoken dialogue, and it appealed to the masses with its mix of fairy tale elements and Masonic symbolism. Mozart knew how to pack a theater, even if his wallet didn't always reflect the box office returns. His final public appearance was a benefit concert for the widow of a fellow musician, an act of generosity that underscores the kind of man he was. Despite his own financial woes, he was willing to help others. This altruistic streak was perhaps as much a part of his legacy as his music. So, what do we make of this final act in Mozart's life? It's a tale of brilliance battling adversity, of a man whose creativity defied his circumstances. While the myths add a layer of intrigue, the real story is one of relentless creativity and human resilience. Mozart's life was a masterclass in navigating the chaos of existence with grace, humor, and a whole lot of talent. As we prepare to delve into the next chapter, remember, Mozart's story didn't end with his death. His music continues to resonate, a testament to his unyielding spirit and unmatched genius. Stay tuned as we unravel the legacy he left behind, exploring how his work transcended his time to become the timeless symphony we celebrate today. Mozart's story didn't end with his death. It merely turned a new page in the symphony of his life. Now, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions about Mozart's final farewell: the unmarked pauper's grave. The romantic image of a mass grave, with Mozart tossed in alongside the destitute, is more myth than reality. In truth, he was buried in a common grave, which was standard practice in Vienna at the time, regardless of one's status. The graves were intended for multiple occupants, but the notion of a pauper's pit is a bit of poetic license. It was less Dickensian tragedy and more a reflection of urban space constraints and the city's burgeoning population, Vienna's version of a carpool lane. So, why the myth? Well, it plays into the narrative of the tortured genius, unappreciated in life and martyred in death. But let's give credit where it's due. Mozart did have a modest funeral, attended by friends and family, and he was mourned by those who recognized his genius. The notion that he was completely forgotten at the time of his death is as accurate as claiming he composed all his works in a single night by candlelight. It's dramatic, but not quite true. Fast forward a few decades, and Mozart's legacy starts to take on the shape of a musical colossus. Initially, his posthumous fame grew slowly, like a fine wine left to age. You see, the early 19th century was all about Beethoven, the musical juggernaut who captured the public's imagination with his stormy symphonies and revolutionary flair. But as the century progressed, the world began to catch on to what they'd missed in Mozart's lifetime. His music was rediscovered, republished, and revered, sliding gracefully into the pantheon of the greats. By the late 1800s, Mozart was no longer just a composer. He was an institution. His operas, symphonies, and chamber music became cultural touchstones, performed in concert halls across Europe and beyond. And here's a kicker. Mozart's music was seen as the epitome of classical elegance, a beacon of melodic perfection. It was the kind of music that made you sit up straight and think, ah, so that's what genius sounds like. He went from being a composer of his time to being the composer for all time, a transition smoother than a glissando on a grand piano. Let's not forget the economic context that helped shape this legacy. The 19th century saw a burgeoning middle class with a taste for culture and an appetite for the arts. Concerts became more accessible, and with them, Mozart's music found new audiences ready to be swept off their feet by his intricate compositions. The rise of public concerts and music societies meant that Mozart's works were performed with increasing regularity, turning him into a household name. And then there's the mythologizing of Mozart, the stories, the films, the plays. Take Peter Schaffer's Amadeus, which catapulted Mozart back into popular consciousness with a narrative as compelling as it was fictional. It painted a picture of Mozart as a bawdy, brilliant enfant terrible, juxtaposed with a brooding salary. While the portrayal is more Hollywood than history, it underscores the enduring fascination with Mozart's character and his work. Even if it plays fast and loose with the facts, it serves as a testament to Mozart's lasting impact on culture. But Mozart's legacy isn't just about the music. It's about what his life teaches us about the precarious dance between talent and toil. His story is a sobering reminder that genius alone doesn't guarantee success or happiness. Mozart's journey was one of relentless hard work, negotiating the whims of patrons and the harsh economic realities of his day. He navigated a world where the currency of talent was often undervalued, a lesson that rings true for many artists even today. His life is a masterclass in resilience, in creating despite the odds, and in finding joy in the act of creation itself. What Mozart leaves us, then, is not just a body of work, but a blueprint for the artist's life, a life marked by passion, perseverance, and a touch of reckless abandon. He was a man who lived for his art, who defied the constraints of his time with a quill in one hand and a musical score in the other. His music is a reminder that while life may be unpredictable, the beauty we create can transcend the chaos. Mozart's enduring legacy is a symphony that continues to play, a testament to the power of creativity to outlast the vicissitudes of fortune. His story is a poignant mix of romantic allure and harsh reality, a reminder that behind every legendary figure is a human being, striving, struggling, and most importantly, creating. As we close the book on this chapter, let's remember Mozart not just as a musical genius, but as an artist who dared to dream beyond the notes, leaving a legacy that resonates through the ages. So next time you hear a Mozart piece, listen closely. You might just catch the echoes of a life lived to the fullest, note by glorious note. Back in the Middle Ages, when people weren't busy dodging the Black Death or inventing new ways to catapult livestock, they were getting ready to party during the darkest days of winter. The Christmas celebrations of the Middle Ages were a curious mix of the sacred, the secular, and the slightly absurd. Let's start with the winter solstice, the OG reason for the season. Before Christmas was all about a bearded man in a red suit, the winter solstice marked a pivotal time to gather, feast, and try to forget that you haven't seen the sun in what feels like forever. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. Those 12 days of Christmas, they weren't just a catchy tune about gift-giving that would bankrupt even the richest lord. Nope, they were actually a time of extended celebration, stretching from Christmas Day itself all the way to Twelfth Night on January 5th. But don't let the idea of medieval revelries fool you. This wasn't a time of endless merriment for everyone. While the nobles might have been guzzling wine and polishing off swan pies, Yes, those were a thing. The peasants were probably just trying to keep their heads above water. Or mud, more likely, given medieval street conditions. Let's talk brass tacks, or more aptly, the lack of them. Hosting a medieval Christmas feast wasn't just a matter of tossing a turkey in the oven. It was a logistical nightmare and an economic burden. Consider this. A single ox could cost up to 5 shillings in the 14th century, which was about the same as 5 days' wages for a skilled tradesman. And that's before you even get to the ale, a staple at any decent feast. Ale was practically the medieval version of bottled water, except it was more like drinking a really weak beer all day because, let's face it, the water wasn't exactly Evian quality. Speaking of ale, let's pour one out for the medieval peasants who brewed their own because they couldn't afford to buy it. Brewing beer was a communal affair, and often the only way to get a bit of extra coin in the purse, or the medieval equivalent of a purse, which was likely a pouch of dubious hygiene. Meat was another big-ticket item on the medieval shopping list. A pig could set you back about 2 shillings, which made bacon a luxury, not a breakfast staple. Given these costs, it's no wonder that peasants often pooled resources for communal feasts, turning Christmas into a sort of medieval potluck where everyone brought what they could, assuming they hadn't already eaten it. Now, while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the idea that medieval Christmas was a non-stop, jolly extravaganza. Sure, there were feasts, but these often came with a side of economic anxiety. Hosting festivities was a social obligation, a way to show off your wealth, or at least not show your lack of it. For those lower down the feudal ladder, this meant scraping together whatever could be spared to avoid the shame of an empty table. It's a bit like today's pressure to keep up with the Joneses, except with more mud and fewer credit cards. In this world of stark economic divides, the role of the church was both spiritual and practical. The clergy encouraged charity during the festive season, which meant that those with means were expected to donate to the less fortunate. This was all well and good, but it also reinforced the existing social hierarchy, reminding everyone who held the power and the purse strings. For the peasants, this could mean a little extra food or even a chance to attend the Lord's feast if they were lucky. Now, you might be wondering about the entertainment at these medieval parties. Forget Netflix or even a good book by the fire. The entertainment of choice was often a mummers' play, a sort of medieval mashup of theatre, dance, and what we might call improv, with the occasional bout of sword fighting thrown in for good measure. These plays were often allegorical, with themes of good versus evil, and occasionally featured characters like St. George or a dragon for a bit of added drama. At the end of the day, the medieval Christmas season was a complex tapestry of traditions, economic realities, and social expectations. The winter solstice and the 12 days of Christmas were both an escape from and a reminder of the year's hardships. And while we might look back with a bit of nostalgia, it's worth remembering that for many, the season was less about joy and more about survival. So, next time you sip on some holiday ale, spare a thought for those medieval revelers who, despite it all, found reasons to celebrate in the midst of long, dark winters. And speaking of finding reasons to celebrate, let's dive into some of the more colorful traditions of medieval Christmas that would make even the most extravagant office holiday party look like a child's birthday bash. Enter the Boy Bishop and the Feast of Fools, two events that threw the social order into a blender and hit puree, if only for a day. First up, the Boy Bishop. Picture this. It's December 6th, the feast day of St. Nicholas, and amid the usual churchly activities, the local cathedral or parish would do something quite unexpected. They'd elect a choir boy to serve as bishop for a day, complete with clerical vestments, a mitre, and a staff. Now, before you start imagining this as a charming bit of medieval fun, remember that the real bishop and clergy were often still in attendance, watching the whole thing unfold with an eye on maintaining their authority. This wasn't the church going rogue. It was a controlled spectacle, a reminder of the age-old dictum: power can be lent, but never truly given. The boy bishop tradition was a pointed exercise in role reversal, lending a veneer of empowerment to those who were otherwise powerless. It was an opportunity for the community to indulge in a little topsy-turvydom, but with the comfort of knowing that the world would soon right itself. Think of it as the medieval version of letting the intern lead a meeting. Everyone knows who's really in charge, but for a few hours, the hierarchy is humorously upended. Of course, this wasn't merely about having a laugh at the expense of the ecclesiastical order. The boy bishop's mock sermons often included critiques of the community and its leaders. It's like a medieval roast where the guest of honor is the societal status quo. The church, in all its wisdom, understood the value of letting the steam out of the pressure cooker every now and then. After all, a little controlled chaos today could stave off actual anarchy tomorrow. Then there's the Feast of Fools, a celebration that took the idea of role reversal and cranked it up to 11. Held on or around January 1st, the Feast of Fools allowed the lower clergy and laypeople to impersonate their superiors. And by impersonate, we're talking full-on parody. Imagine your annual office party, except the IT guy is dressed as the CEO, making speeches about the absurdity of corporate policies while his co-workers cheer him on. This carnival of controlled chaos was a mix of satire, comedy, and sometimes outright debauchery. The participants wore masks, sang bawdy songs, and rang bells, often inside the church itself. It was a spectacle that blurred the line between the sacred and the profane, giving rise to performances that would make a modern HR department shiver. But before we romanticize this too much, let's remember the Feast of Fools wasn't exactly about freedom and liberation. Much like today's corporate holiday party, where the boss might loosen his tie and share a joke, the boundaries of acceptable behavior were still tightly regulated. The festivities were a release valve, a chance for people to step outside their daily roles, but only temporarily. Once the laughter subsided and the masks came off, everyone returned to their usual positions in the social hierarchy. The economic underpinnings of these events are worth noting too. Hosting such an affair required resources, food, drink, and costumes, meaning that the true cost of such an event often fell on the lower classes who could least afford it. You might think of it as everyone chipping in for the party fund, only to realize that the party itself mostly benefited those higher up the ladder. So, why did these peculiar traditions exist in the first place? In a world where the gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the moat around a castle, these events served as a social glue, a way to remind everyone of their place while allowing for a brief, harmless subversion. It was a dance of power and humility, a chance to poke fun at authority without actually challenging it. In the grand theater that was medieval society, these events were a way to keep everyone in their seats. But what about the broader appeal? Why do these traditions still fascinate us? Perhaps it's because they reflect our own complex relationship with authority and tradition. Even today, we love the idea of the underdog having their moment in the sun, even if it's just for a fleeting second. The boy bishop and the Feast of Fools remind us that human nature craves both order and chaos, stability and change, all wrapped up in a festive bow. As we look back at these traditions, it's easy to see echoes of them in our modern celebrations. The office Christmas party, with its obligatory secret Santa and awkward dance-offs, might just be our own version of a medieval mockery, where the lines between the professional and the personal blur, if only for a night. And while the stakes are decidedly lower, no one's donning a bishop's mitre or ringing bells in a cathedral. The spirit of temporary role reversal and playful critique remains. So there you have it, medieval Christmas customs that were less about decking the halls and more about navigating the social labyrinth of the time. They were complex, layered affairs that mirrored the societal structure, offering a glimpse into a world where even the absurd had its place. And as we march on into more celebrations, it's worth keeping in mind that while traditions may evolve, the human desire to both uphold and upend them seems to be as timeless as the season itself. And speaking of timeless desires, let's dive back into the murky waters of medieval Christmas, where the church was busy playing a game of cultural chess against the backdrop of pagan traditions. If you think today's holiday season is commercialized, just wait until you hear about how the medieval church strategically absorbed pagan customs to keep their congregants and power intact. First off, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or perhaps the Yule log in the hearth. You see, the church wasn't exactly thrilled about people getting all festive with pagan rites, but they were savvy enough to know that outright bans were about as popular as a tax increase. Instead, they opted for a more insidious approach. Adopt and adapt. Take the winter solstice celebrations, those merry gatherings that predated Christmas by centuries. The church decided to superimpose the birth of Christ over the old festivities, turning what was once a nod to nature's cycles into a celebration of divine birth. Why fight the tide when you can just ride the wave? This wasn't just a matter of rebranding. It was a calculated move to keep people coming to church, literally and figuratively. By aligning Christian celebrations with established pagan ones, the church could offer a sense of continuity and familiarity. After all, if you could still light a Yule log, but now in honor of Christ, why resist? This wasn't just about religion, it was strategic politics. The church was playing the long game, and it knew that a spoonful of tradition helped the doctrine go down. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Christmas tree, a staple in many homes today, yet originally a symbol of life in the dead of winter for pagan Germans. Enter the church once again, with its uncanny ability to pivot faster than a medieval jester performing for a new lord. They saw the evergreen as a symbol of eternal life, and voila, it was now a Christian tradition. Fast forward a few centuries, and Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, is credited with first adding candles to a tree, thus inventing the precursor to your neighbor's extravagant light display. Now, you might wonder how we know all this. It's not like medieval monks were live tweeting their thoughts. Lucky for us, they were prolific scribes. One of our best sources comes from the Venerable Bede, an 8th century English monk. Bede wrote extensively about the church's efforts to align Christian and pagan practices, offering a window into these ecclesiastical maneuverings. It's a bit like finding out your favorite holiday recipe was actually concocted by a marketing team, disillusioning yet fascinating. Of course, not everyone was on board with this blend of sacred and secular. We have to talk about the Puritans, those austere folks who saw Christmas as an ungodly affair. Yes, they played the Grinch long before Dr. Seuss was a twinkle in his ancestor's eye. In the mid-17th century, they went so far as to ban Christmas in England, and later in the American colonies. They were like that one relative who insists on talking politics at the dinner table, unwanted and unavoidable. The Puritans viewed Christmas as a time of excess, a festival of folly that distracted from true piety. Their disdain for the holiday's pagan roots was so strong that in 1647, Parliament banned Christmas celebrations, and soldiers were sent to break up festivities. Imagine a squad of no-nonsense soldiers crashing your Christmas party to confiscate your figgy pudding. Talk about a war on Christmas. But let's not paint all medieval clergy with the same puritanical brush. Many were quite pragmatic, understanding that a little festivity could go a long way in keeping the populous content and the church pews filled. They promoted charity during the season, encouraging wealthier parishioners to donate food and ale. This wasn't pure altruism, it was social engineering. By encouraging generosity, the church reinforced its role as a community cornerstone, a clever way to maintain influence while appearing benevolent. And here's the kicker. Many of the traditions absorbed by the church still echo in today's celebrations. The merging of pagan and Christian customs has given us a holiday season that's a bit like a fruitcake, packed with a little bit of everything, much of it foreign to its modern form. Whether it's the tree in your living room or the carols on your playlist, these elements are a testament to the church's historical pragmatism and the enduring power of tradition. So, next time you sip your eggnog, or admire your twinkling lights, remember the layers of history wrapped up in each tradition. These aren't just quaint customs. They're the product of a centuries-long dance between culture and control, a balancing act that has shaped not just how we celebrate, but why. And as we wrap up this segment, let's keep the momentum rolling with more tales of medieval ingenuity and intrigue. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Now, speaking of medieval ingenuity and intrigue, let's unwrap the complicated tale of gift-giving during the Middle Ages. If you think the modern holiday shopping spree is a Herculean effort, just wait until you hear about the medieval version, a time when giving someone a present was more akin to pledging allegiance than sharing festive cheer. First off, let's debunk a common myth, the idea that medieval Christmas was a gift-laden event with the same fervor as today's Black Friday sales. In reality, the concept of exchanging gifts wasn't about stuffing stockings or finding the perfect gadget. Instead, it was deeply rooted in social and political machinations. Gifts were less about generosity and more about obligation and power dynamics. Think of them as medieval LinkedIn endorsements, but with more leather pouches and fewer emojis. In the Middle Ages, gift-giving was often reserved for New Year's Day rather than Christmas itself. It was a strategic exercise, a way for vassals to demonstrate loyalty to their lords and for the nobility to maintain their social standing. Imagine this. You're a humble serf, and your local lord presents you with a small token, a piece of land, or a new tunic. It's not exactly a PlayStation 5, but in those days, it was a big deal. In return, you'd better be ready to churn out a thank you note in the form of unyielding fealty. For the aristocracy, the stakes were even higher. Lavish gifts were a means to secure alliances, and the more extravagant the better. These weren't just thoughtful presents, they were investments in political capital. Henry Roman III of England, for example, was known to give costly gifts like jewelry and horses to his allies to ensure their support. Talk about high-stakes Secret Santa. But here's the kicker. The burden of gift-giving often trickled down to the lower classes, who could ill afford such displays. The economic strain of participating in these rituals was akin to today's pressure to keep up with the Joneses, only with the added challenge of not having a credit card to fall back on. For many, this meant sacrificing necessities to present even the smallest token to those above them in the social hierarchy. It's like being asked to bring a caviar platter to a potluck when you can barely afford the bus fare. Now, let's talk numbers. Consider that a simple woolen cloak, an acceptable gift for a servant to offer a lord, could cost upwards of 3 shillings, which was equivalent to several days' wages for a labourer. And if you were a noble trying to impress the king, you might be looking at a gift worth 40 shillings or more, a sum that could buy you a decent plot of land. No pressure, right? These economic burdens weren't just a seasonal headache. They were a year-round reality for many. And while the romanticized image of gift-giving might feature warm hearths and merry carolers, the truth was often a stark reminder of one's place in the feudal order. It was a system designed to reinforce social hierarchies, not dismantle them. But let's not completely scorn the practice. After all, these gifts did serve a purpose beyond mere obligation. They helped to maintain the delicate balance of power and loyalty that was crucial in a time when political alliances were as fragile as the parchment they were written on. It was a dance of diplomacy, awkward, sure, but necessary for survival. So, as we peel back the layers of this medieval tradition, it's clear that gift-giving was less about spreading cheer and more about navigating the complex web of feudal loyalties. The presents exchanged were tokens of allegiance, reminders that in the Game of Thrones, medieval edition, one's standing could hinge on the art of giving. It's a practice that, in many ways, echoes today's corporate gift-giving rituals, where the line between genuine generosity and strategic maneuvering is as fine as ever. And speaking of fine lines, let's shift gears to consider how these medieval customs have evolved, or perhaps devolved, into today's holiday shopping frenzy. The transition from tokens of allegiance to commercial extravaganza didn't happen overnight, but it's a fascinating journey worth exploring. Stay tuned, because our historical sleigh ride isn't over yet. Now, as we fast forward from medieval gift-giving to today's holiday shopping hysteria, it's clear that the transition from feudal tokens of allegiance to commercial extravaganza didn't just happen by chance. It was more of a slow-burning transformation, like a Yule log that just refuses to go out. You see, the seeds of today's consumerism were sown long before department stores and e-commerce. The Industrial Revolution kick-started the mass production of goods, making it possible for even the average Joe, or John, if we're sticking to medieval names, to purchase gifts that were once the exclusive domain of the elite. But here's the twist. While the nature of the gifts evolved, the underlying social pressures remained remarkably consistent. Just like their medieval ancestors, modern consumers feel the weight of obligation during the holiday season. Only now it comes with a hefty credit card bill rather than a woolen cloak. The psychology of gifting has always been about more than the material. It's a social glue, a way to affirm relationships and navigate complex social landscapes. Today's Black Friday chaos is less about the products themselves and more about participating in a ritual that reaffirms our connections, albeit in a more frenzied, less feudal manner. And speaking of rituals, let's not forget the Christmas tree, that perennial symbol of holiday cheer. Its roots, pun absolutely intended, go deep into pre-Christian traditions, yet its modern incarnation is a product of 19th century innovation. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert popularized the Christmas tree in England after the German-born Albert introduced it to the British royal family. Their 1848 illustrated appearance with a decorated tree in the Illustrated London News turned a once foreign custom into an English staple faster than you can say, "God save the Queen." The Christmas tree also underscores another persistent theme, the cyclical nature of traditions. Each generation adds its own layer of meaning, creating a rich tapestry that's both familiar and ever-evolving. The tinsel and ornaments dangling from branches are more than just decoration. They're historical breadcrumbs, each one a nod to a past that's continually being rewritten. Our forebears might have used candles and paper ornaments, but the spirit of the tradition, bringing light into the darkness, remains unchanged. And while we're on the subject of light, let's illuminate the role of the holiday feast. The medieval banquet was less about culinary exploration and more about survival, a chance to consume perishables before they spoiled in the winter months. Contrast that with today's holiday dinners, where the only thing that spoils is Uncle Bob's attempt at humor. Yet, the essence of these gatherings, community, sustenance, and a brief respite from the harshness of winter, endures. The table may now groan under the weight of turkey and trimmings rather than swan pies, but the act of coming together to share a meal remains a timeless tradition. But what about the jolly old man in red, you ask? Santa Claus, that merry amalgamation of folklore and modern marketing, is perhaps the most glaring example of tradition's evolution. The medieval Saint Nicholas, a 4th century Greek bishop known for his generosity, laid the groundwork, but it took a few centuries and a couple of poets to transform him into the Santa we know today. Clement Clark Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, and Coca-Cola's 1931 advertising campaign featuring the jolly, rotund figure we recognize cemented his place in modern Christmas lore. It's a testament to the enduring power of narrative and the willingness of culture to adapt and adopt, much like the Church's strategic embrace of pagan customs all those centuries ago. Now, you might wonder why these traditions endure, why we cling to them despite changing times and circumstances. The answer lies in the human condition itself, a persistent desire to find joy and meaning in the darkest months. Winter has always been a time of reflection, a season that demands we look inward even as we huddle together for warmth. Traditions provide a comforting sense of continuity, a connection to the past that grounds us even as we look to the future. They remind us that we are part of something larger, a thread in the vast tapestry of human history. So, as we conclude this exploration of medieval Christmas customs and their modern counterparts, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy they leave behind. These traditions, whether forgotten or transformed, offer a window into the human spirit, its resilience and its creativity. They challenge us to look beyond the tinsel and trappings to the truths that lie beneath, to understand the cyclical nature of culture and the enduring power of community. In the end, the story of Christmas, whether medieval or modern, is one of balance. It's about finding harmony between the sacred and the secular, the past and the present, the practical and the joyful. It's a dance as old as time itself, a reminder that while the world may change, the human desire to celebrate, to connect, and to find light in the darkness remains steadfast. So, as you sip your mulled wine or unwrap that carefully chosen gift, spare a thought for the revelers of old, who, despite the mud and the muck, found reasons to rejoice. And as you carry these traditions forward, know that you are part of an unbroken chain, a living testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. In the sweltering heart of ancient Egypt, young Ramses Roman II was likely more concerned with staying cool than contemplating his destiny to rule an empire. Ramses, the future great ancestor, was born in 1303 BCE, long before the age of air conditioning or even a simple fan. He was the royal offspring of Pharaoh Seti, a man who knew a thing or two about power plays, and Queen Tuya, who probably had to remind everyone that, yes, mothers do indeed know best. Seti was no slouch when it came to setting the stage for his son's reign. He was like a meticulous director, ensuring that the props, the plot, and even the audience were all just right. Under Seti's watchful eye, Egypt flourished economically and militarily. The land of the Nile was a bustling marketplace, where merchants traded papyrus and wheat with as much enthusiasm as modern-day traders swap stocks. Seti had been a strategic genius, expanding Egypt's borders and reinforcing its position as a superpower of the ancient world. He was the kind of guy who would have had the ancient equivalent of a LinkedIn profile filled with endorsements for leadership and strategic foresight. But Ramses didn't just inherit a kingdom. He inherited a sprawling, complicated stage full of potential pitfalls. The royal succession was as smooth as a chariot ride over cobblestones. Ramses' rise to power was less of a fairy tale and more of a reality show, complete with intrigue and enough familial drama to rival any modern soap opera. The politics of ancient Egypt were ruthless, where being next in line to the throne didn't necessarily guarantee you a comfy seat. You had to be cunning, because there were always a few shadowy figures lurking around, eager to take your spot. Imagine Game of Thrones, but with more sand and fewer dragons. By the time Ramses took the throne in 1279 BCE, Egypt was at a pivotal economic crossroads. The nation's wealth was tied to the Nile, the lifeblood that turned barren desert into fertile land. The river was Egypt's ATM, dispensing agricultural bounty that fueled a thriving economy. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The currency of the time was based on grain, which meant that a bad flood or drought could spell disaster. Ramses had to ensure that the river's gifts kept flowing, literally and metaphorically, to keep Egypt's economy afloat. Ramses was a young man in a hurry, keen to leave his mark on history. He embarked on an ambitious building spree, commissioning temples and statues that screamed, "Look at me, I'm important," with all the subtlety of a neon sign. The young pharaoh was a master of ancient PR, using monumental architecture to project power and stability. His statues weren't merely decorative. They were political statements chiseled in stone, meant to convey the message: Ramses is here, and he's not going anywhere. But all this grandeur didn't come cheap. The construction of massive temples like the Ramesseum and the expansion of the Karnak temple complex required resources, labor, and most importantly, time. Ramses had to juggle the demands of maintaining a vast empire while keeping his builders busy, and sometimes the numbers just didn't add up. He was like a CEO trying to manage a construction company during a recession, always seeking new ways to fund his ambitious projects. Navigating the ancient world of politics was no walk along the Nile's banks either. Ramses faced challenges from rival powers like the Hittites, who were keen to expand their own influence. Diplomacy was less about shaking hands and more about ensuring that your army was bigger than the other guys. Ramses had to be both warrior and diplomat, ready to negotiate or fight depending on who was at the door. Despite the challenges, Ramses was a shrewd operator. He knew that maintaining power was as much about perception as it was about actual control. By projecting an image of strength and divine favor, he kept the wheels of his empire turning. Ramses understood that in the Game of Thrones, sometimes it was about who could play the long game better. And so, with a blend of charm, cunning, and a bit of good old-fashioned bravado, Ramses II began his journey to become one of the most celebrated pharaohs in history. Ramses II didn't just want to be remembered, he wanted to be unforgettable. Enter his building projects, grandiose, audacious, and possibly a bit extra, even by ancient Egyptian standards. Picture a pharaoh who had the audacity to carve entire temples out of solid rock, like the famous Abu symbol. Completed around 1244 BCE, these temples weren't just about religious devotion. They were rock-solid PR campaigns. Ramses' colossal statues flanking the entrance were essentially ancient Egypt's version of billboards screaming, "Ramses was here. Seriously, look at this." Abu symbol, located near the Nile's banks in Nubia, was a logistical marvel. Imagine hauling 20-ton statues 140 miles up the river. This wasn't just an exercise in architecture. It was a feat of human endurance that involved thousands of workers. And we're talking about a workforce that didn't clock out at 5 for happy hour. These were laborers, craftsmen, and artisans, all toiling under the relentless desert sun, wielding tools that would make a modern construction worker weep. Ramses managed to mobilize this massive workforce without Twitter or Zoom calls, a testament to his organizational prowess, or perhaps sheer force of will. But let's get real about the economics here. The construction of these monuments demanded a king's ransom, which was an issue since Egypt's treasury wasn't exactly overflowing. The currency of the time was grain, and paying thousands of workers in bread was quite the juggling act. It's estimated that the construction of Abu Simbel may have consumed resources equivalent to feeding 20,000 people for several years. Ramses was gambling on the future, investing in stone monuments while hoping the Nile wouldn't throw a tantrum and ruin the harvest. The temples themselves were a blend of architectural genius and a bit of creative ego-stroking. The larger temple at Abu Simbel was dedicated to the sun gods Amun-Ra, Ra-Horakhti, and Ptah, as well as to Ramses himself. Talk about a humble brag. His divine self-portrayal was a masterstroke of branding, ensuring that his legacy would be intertwined with the gods' celestial glow. The smaller temple, dedicated to Ramses' favorite wife, Nefertari, was no less impressive, featuring intricate carvings that would make even the most jaded art critic nod in approval. Yet, behind the facade of divine worship lay a more terrestrial motive: control. By placing these temples in Nubia, Ramses was sending a clear message to the southern territories. Egypt's reach extended far beyond the borders of the Nile Delta. The temples stood as stone sentinels, proclaiming Ramses' dominance and serving as constant reminders of Egyptian power. One might say Ramses was the original influencer, using his architectural prowess to solidify political control. But here's the kicker: all this grandeur came at a cost. The sustainability of these projects was questionable, to say the least. The massive labor force needed to carve, haul, and assemble these structures siphoned resources away from other essential activities, like farming and infrastructure maintenance. It was like building a luxury high-rise while the roads around it crumbled. Strain on Egypt's economy was significant, and while Ramses' monuments have stood the test of time, they likely stretched the kingdom's resources to the breaking point. And let's not forget about the environmental impact. The massive quarries used to extract the stone for these projects scarred the landscape, leaving behind desolate wastelands. It was an ancient version of strip mining, with ecological consequences that would make any modern environmentalist cringe. But Ramses wasn't about to let a little thing like environmental sustainability get in the way of his monumental ambitions. So, was Ramses' building spree a testament to his devotion to the gods, or was it a colossal exercise in vanity? Perhaps it was a bit of both. His temples were as much about securing his place in history as they were about religious piety. They were a message to the world that Ramses was a force to be reckoned with, a pharaoh who wasn't content to merely rule, but who sought to etch his name into the annals of history with a chisel. In the end, Ramses II was both a visionary and a pragmatist, balancing his dreams of immortality with the harsh realities of maintaining an empire. His building projects were a reflection of his complex legacy, a blend of divine aspiration and human ambition, forever carved in stone. As we admire the grandeur of Abu Simbel today, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of Ramses' achievements. But behind the awe-inspiring facades lies a story of economic strain, environmental exploitation, and a relentless quest for power that defined one of history's most fascinating figures. Now, while Ramses was busy flexing his architectural muscles, he was also gearing up for what would become one of the most famous military campaigns in ancient history, the Battle of Kadesh. The Battle of Kadesh, an epic clash that's been romanticized more than a Shakespearean tragedy, and yet, under all that mythic gloss, was as messy as your average family reunion. Let's peel back the layers and see what was really going on. First off, let's set the scene. The year is 1274 BCE, and Ramses is itching for some action. At the time, the Hittite Empire, led by King Muwatalli II, was the major rival power in the region. Think of them as the Pepsi to Egypt's Coke, always jostling for market share. Kadesh, a fortified city in what is now modern-day Syria, was the prize at the center of this ancient turf war. The city was strategically important, like the gateway to controlling lucrative trade routes. Whoever held Kadesh held the key to regional dominance. Ramses, never one to shy away from a challenge, decided it was high time to teach those Hittites a lesson. Ramses marched north with a force that would have made any ancient recruiting officer proud. About 20,000 men, divided into 4 divisions named after Egyptian gods: Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set. If you're going into battle, you might as well have divine backing right. The journey was no walk in the park. Covering hundreds of miles in the sweltering heat, Ramses and his men probably wished they could have phoned in sick. But they pressed on, determined to etch their names in history, or at least in Ramses' version of it. Now, here's where things get juicy. Ramses, ever the optimist, charged ahead with just his Ammon division, eager to face the enemy. But surprise, surprise, the Hittites were not where he thought they'd be. Ramses had been duped by some clever Hittite spies who fed him misleading intel. Imagine running headfirst into a surprise birthday party, only to find out it's not your birthday and everyone's throwing punches instead of confetti. The Hittites, with a chariot force numbering around 3,000, took the Egyptians by surprise. The ensuing chaos was the stuff of legend, or at least Ramses' version of it. According to Ramses' own accounts, he single-handedly turned the tide of battle, fighting off the Hittite horde with the aid of his trusty sword and a little help from the guards. In reality, it was less a heroic stand and more a desperate scramble for survival. Ramses did manage to rally his troops, but it wasn't a sweeping victory so much as a narrow escape from disaster. The battle itself ended in what historians agree was a stalemate. Both sides claimed victory, of course, because admitting defeat wasn't exactly the ancient way. But Ramses, ever the PR maestro, spun the narrative to his advantage. Inscriptions and carvings throughout Egypt proclaimed his triumph at Kadesh, complete with dramatic imagery that would have made Hollywood directors swoon. Ramses was a master of the humble brag, transforming a military draw into a chapter of glorified heroism etched in stone. Beyond the battlefield theatrics, there was a more significant outcome: the first known peace treaty in history, signed between Ramses and the Hittites. After years of back-and-forth skirmishes, both powers realized that constant warfare was about as productive as arguing with a toddler. The treaty, recorded on a silver tablet, detailed terms of peace, alliance, and mutual support against external threats. Ramses, ever the showman, presented it as a testament to his diplomatic prowess. In reality, it was a pragmatic move. Both empires were stretched thin, and peace was more profitable than perpetual conflict. This treaty wasn't just a piece of parchment, it was a game-changer. It allowed Ramses to focus his resources on domestic issues, like keeping the Nile from throwing one of its infamous fits. For the Hittites, it meant stability in their western territories. The treaty held for decades, a testament to its effectiveness in keeping the ancient arms race in check. So, what's the takeaway from Ramses' military escapades at Kadesh? It's a classic case of turning lemons into lemonade, or in this case, a stalemate into a supposed victory. Ramses understood the power of narrative better than most. He knew that in the grand tapestry of history, perception often outweighed reality. By immortalizing his version of events, Ramses ensured that his legacy endured long after the dust of Kadesh had settled. In the end, Ramses' Roman II military campaigns were as much about securing his legacy as they were about securing territory. He wielded both sword and story, using each to reinforce the other. It's a lesson in spin that would make modern publicists nod in approval. And while the Battle of Kadesh didn't end with a decisive victory, it did cement Ramses' reputation as both a warrior and a statesman. Stay tuned, because Ramses' story is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue on the horizon. With the dust barely settling from Kadesh, Ramses turned his gaze inward, to the land of pyramids and papyrus that demanded just as much attention as any foreign battlefield. Egypt wasn't just a realm of stone monuments and divine decrees. It was an intricate tapestry woven with the threads of everyday life, from the bustling bazaars of Thebes to the sun-scorched fields of the Nile Delta. For Ramses, ruling Egypt meant doing more than flexing military muscle. He had to keep the complex machinery of his empire humming smoothly, or risk the whole pyramid scheme collapsing faster than you can say Tutankhamun. Now, Ramses was no stranger to the art of ruling. He wasn't just a pharaoh. He was an ancient multitasker, juggling diplomacy, warfare, and domestic governance, all while maintaining an aura of semi-divine authority. The challenge was clear: how to balance his grandiose external ventures with the nitty-gritty of internal affairs. The pharaoh's solution: a mix of pragmatic policies, strategic marriages, and a bit of good old-fashioned showmanship. Let's start with the economy, the lifeline of Ramses' reign. Picture ancient Egypt as a massive agricultural machine, with the Nile as its beating heart. This river wasn't just a picturesque backdrop. It was the bloodstream of the nation, ensuring that fields yielded enough grain to feed both the living and the eternal afterlife aspirations of the deceased. Ramses knew that in a place where grain was as good as gold, a bad harvest could spell disaster. So, he focused on infrastructure projects that would keep the Nile's bounty flowing, literally. One of Ramses' key initiatives was the restoration and expansion of the canal network. This wasn't just about moving water around, it was about moving the economy forward. Canals like the one connecting the Nile to the Red Sea weren't just wet ditches. They were economic superhighways, facilitating trade and ensuring that goods and grain moved efficiently across the kingdom. By investing in this infrastructure, Ramses was essentially laying the groundwork for Egypt's economic stability, ensuring that even in times of drought, the nation's granaries wouldn't run dry. But Ramses' domestic policies weren't all about digging ditches and praying for rain. He also had to keep the social fabric from fraying at the edges. Egypt's society was a complex hierarchy, with the pharaoh at the top, the priests and nobles just below, and the majority of Egyptians, farmers, artisans, and laborers, forming the broad base of the social pyramid. Ramses had to ensure that this base remained stable, lest the whole structure crumble. His approach to law and order was both firm and strategic. Ramses understood that a stable society was one where the rule of law was clear and consistent. He invested in the judicial system, ensuring that local governors and officials were not just figureheads, but had the authority to maintain order and resolve disputes. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about ensuring that the wheels of commerce and daily life turned without a hitch. Of course, maintaining order also meant dealing with the perennial threat of famine and social unrest. Egypt's economy was as dependent on the fickle moods of the Nile as a cat is on its whims. When the river's inundations were too low, fields went dry, and when they were too high, homes were washed away. Ramses had to be proactive, not reactive. He implemented measures to store surplus grain in good years, creating a buffer against the lean times. It was a bit like ancient Egypt's version of a rainy day fund, ensuring that when the Nile threw a tantrum, the people wouldn't starve. But while Ramses was busy ensuring the survival of his realm, he didn't exactly live like a monk. The pharaoh's lifestyle was the stuff of legend, with opulence that would make even the Kardashians blush. His palace was a sprawling testament to luxury, filled with gold, jewels, and every comfort imaginable. Ramses knew that projecting an image of divine prosperity was as much about maintaining power as any military victory. To the common Egyptian, the pharaoh was a living god, and gods weren't expected to live humbly. Yet, this opulence came with a price. While Ramses was busy building his legacy in stone and gold, many of his subjects lived a life far removed from such grandeur. For the average Egyptian, life was a daily struggle. Farmers toiled under the brutal sun, laborers hauled stones for the pharaoh's monuments, and craftsmen carved intricate designs that would outlast their own fleeting lives. The contrast between Ramses' luxurious existence and the hardships of his people was stark, a reminder that in every age, the gap between the haves and the have-nots can be as wide as the Nile itself. Ramses' reign was a balancing act of epic proportions. He was the ultimate ringmaster, keeping the various elements of his empire in check through a mix of strategic governance and larger-than-life antics. He understood the power of perception, using his image as a semi-divine ruler to maintain control. But beneath the glitzy surface, Ramses' policies were rooted in practicality, ensuring that Egypt remained a powerhouse even in times of uncertainty. So, while Ramses Roman II was busy immortalizing himself in stone and securing his place in the pantheon of great rulers, he was also dealing with the day-to-day realities of keeping an ancient empire running. It wasn't all glitz and glory. There were grain shortages to manage, laws to enforce, and a society to keep from unraveling. Yet, through it all, Ramses managed to maintain the delicate balance, ensuring that his reign would be remembered not just for its grandeur, but for its enduring impact on Egypt's history. As we dive deeper into Ramses' domestic adventures, remember that his story is not just about stone temples and military triumphs. It's about the complex dance of politics, economics, and society. a tapestry that, when unraveled, reveals the true genius of one of history's most fascinating figures. Stay tuned, because Ramses' tale is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and insights. As Ramses' Roman II reign drew to a close, it was a bit like watching the final season of a long-running TV series, full of unexpected twists, character development, and, of course, a legacy ripe for debate. After all, 66 years on the throne isn't just a reign. It's practically a dynasty unto itself. Imagine being in charge since the age of 25 and still going strong into your 90. It's like being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, only your 400 one. K is a pyramid, and your board meetings are carved into temple walls. By the time Ramses shuffled off this mortal coil in 1213 BCE, Egypt had undergone a transformation that was as much about the man as it was about the era. His longevity on the throne was unprecedented, and it allowed him to imprint his personality onto every facet of Egyptian life. The monuments, the temples, the cities, every stone seemed to whisper his name. But as the sun set on Ramses' reign, the shadows it cast revealed both triumphs and tribulations. Economically, Ramses' Egypt was a mixed bag. On one hand, his infrastructure projects, like those vital canals, boosted trade and agriculture, ensuring the economy was robust enough to withstand the occasional Nile hiccup. On the other hand, the constant demand for resources to fund his monumental building projects often left the treasury scraping the bottom of the grain barrel. It was a bit like maxing out your credit card to build a dream home. Sure, you have a fantastic place to live, but you're eating ramen for the next decade. Politically, Ramses was a master of the long game. His peace treaty with the Hittites, a groundbreaking diplomatic coup, ensured stability in the region, allowing Egypt to focus inward. But maintaining such a sprawling empire required a deft touch. He had to navigate palace intrigue, manage ambitious governors, and keep a diverse population content. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of herding cats, only the cats are priests, nobles, and various regional leaders, each with their own agenda. Socially, Ramses' era was one of relative peace and prosperity, but it wasn't without its cracks. The divide between the wealthy elite and the ordinary Egyptian was as wide as the Nile at flood stage. While Ramses lived in opulence, the average Egyptian faced the daily grind of laboring in fields or construction sites. It's a classic tale of two worlds, the ruler on his golden throne and the farmer in the sun-baked fields. Ramses' reign might have been gilded, but for many, the shimmer was just out of reach. Now, let's talk about the Ramses of legend versus the Ramses of reality. Today, we often see him through the lens of Hollywood's Technicolor spectacles and Egyptological romance. Films like The 10 Commandments cast Ramses as a tyrannical figure, more villain than visionary. But the real Ramses was a complex character, an absolute monarch who understood the power of PR long before anyone coined the term. He was a master of spin, ensuring his image was as carefully constructed as the temples that bore his likeness. Modern mythmaking has transformed Ramses into a kind of ancient celebrity, a pharaoh whose exploits are as much about myth as they are about history. Who can forget those larger-than-life statues, the colossal temples, and the military campaigns etched into history with the subtlety of a chisel-wielding showman? Yet, behind the facade, Ramses was juggling the realpolitik of his day, balancing ambition with the harsh realities of ruling an empire. As for the lessons Ramses' reign offers today's leaders, well, they're as timeless as the sands of Egypt. First, the power of narrative. Ramses knew that controlling the story was as crucial as winning the battle. Second, the importance of infrastructure. Investing in the foundation of your nation is never wasted effort. Third, the need for diplomacy. Sometimes it's better to sign a treaty than swing a sword. And finally, the delicate balance between ambition and sustainability. Because building an empire is one thing, but maintaining it without bankrupting your resources is another. In the grand tapestry of history, Ramses Roman II stands as a testament to the complexities of leadership. He was a ruler who dared to dream big and carve his name into the annals of time, even if it meant stretching his kingdom to its limits. His legacy is both a cautionary tale and an inspiring saga of what it means to leave a lasting mark on the world. A reminder that while monuments may crumble, the stories we tell endure. So as you drift off to sleep, Remember that Ramses Roman II was more than just a pharaoh. He was a symbol of ambition, an architect of his own legend, and a human being navigating the complexities of power. His reign was a mosaic of triumphs and trials, a narrative that continues to captivate our imaginations. And in the end, isn't that what legacy is all about?